Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt. The scream pierced through Newark Airport's chaos like a blade. No one moved. No one helped. Except one man, a single father holding his daughter's hand, who couldn't walk away from injustice. What happened next changed 3 lives forever. This is the story of how a Navy medic with nothing saved a billionaire CEO who had everything and discovered that sometimes the greatest rescue isn't from danger, it's from loneliness. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of Newark Liberty International Airport buzzed overhead like angry wasps trapped in glass cages. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening in late October, and the terminal hummed with the particular brand of controlled chaos that only major airports could orchestrate. Thousands of strangers moving in choreographed disorder, each consumed by their own urgency, their own destinations, their own carefully constructed worlds that left no room for anyone else's problems. Jack Miller stood near gate C-47, one hand wrapped protectively around his daughter Sophie's small shoulder, the other clutching 2 boarding passes that were rapidly becoming worthless pieces of paper. The departures board flickered again, and another flight status changed from delayed to canceled. He felt Sophie lean against his leg, her 8-year-old frame radiating the particular exhaustion that came from too many hours in transit and too many broken promises about just a little while longer. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Sophie said softly, her voice barely audible over the announcement system crackling to life with yet another apology for circumstances beyond anyone's control. "I know, baby girl. We'll get you something soon," Jack replied, his voice carrying that gentle steadiness that had comforted wounded Marines in field hospitals from Kandahar to Ramadi. He had the kind of calm that couldn't be taught, only earned through years of holding pressure on wounds while helicopters screamed overhead and men half his age cried for their mothers. At 34, Jack still carried himself with military precision, shoulders back, spine straight, eyes constantly scanning his environment with the situational awareness that never quite left combat medics even years after their discharge. His dark hair was cut short, practical rather than stylish, and his face bore the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from too many sleepless nights and too much responsibility shouldered too young. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a gray Henley shirt, and a worn leather jacket that had seen better days but still served its purpose. Sophie, in contrast, was all bright colors and untamed energy barely contained by fatigue. Her curly brown hair was pulled into 2 slightly lopsided pigtails that Jack had attempted that morning with more determination than skill. She wore her favorite purple jacket covered in embroidered butterflies and carried a small backpack decorated with cartoon characters that she refused to let out of her sight. In her arms, she clutched a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hopscotch, who had been her constant companion since she was 3, since the day her mother had walked out of their lives without a backward glance. Jack didn't think about that anymore. Couldn't afford to. He had a daughter to raise, a job to maintain, and a life to build from the rubble of his failed marriage. He'd been doing fine for 5 years now. More than fine, actually. Sophie was happy, healthy, and thriving despite growing up in a modest apartment in Wilmington with a father who worked double shifts at St. Francis Hospital to make ends meet. They had each other, and that was enough. It had to be enough. "Can we get pizza?" Sophie asked, looking up at him with those wide brown eyes that could melt his resolve faster than summer sun on ice cream. "Let's see what they have that's not airport-priced garbage," Jack said, scanning the terminal. But before he could locate the nearest food court, his attention was caught by a disturbance near the executive lounge entrance. It started as a raised voice, male, angry, with the particular edge of someone used to getting their way through intimidation. Jack's body tensed involuntarily, combat instincts firing before his conscious mind could process what he was hearing. "I said we're leaving now, Rachel. Stop being dramatic." The voice belonged to a man in his early 40s, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent. He had the kind of polished appearance that came from personal trainers, tailored clothing, and the absolute certainty that the world would bend to accommodate him. His hand was wrapped around the upper arm of a woman who was trying, with decreasing success, to pull away from his grip. "Andrew, please, you're hurting me," the woman said, her voice strained but trying to maintain composure. Can we just talk about this like adults? We're done talking, Andrew snapped, jerking her forward hard enough that she stumbled in her heels. You've been playing games all week, and I'm finished with it. We're going to get on that private charter I arranged, fly back to San Francisco, and you're going to stop this ridiculous tantrum about needing space or whatever the hell your therapist put in your head. Jack felt Sophie's hand tighten in his. Around them, other travelers were beginning to notice the scene, but in that particular way that modern society had perfected: acknowledgement without engagement, concern without action. People slowed their walking pace, turned their heads slightly, whispered to their companions, but no one intervened. No one wanted to get involved in what might be a domestic situation. No one wanted to make a scene. The woman, Rachel, Andrew had called her, was strikingly beautiful in the way that powerful women often were, though her beauty was currently overshadowed by distress. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in what had probably started as an elegant bun, but was now coming loose in wisps around her face. She wore a designer business suit in navy blue, tailored perfectly to her frame, but there was something disheveled about her appearance now. Her blouse partially untucked, her jacket askew, and most notably, the way she was favoring her left arm. "Andrew, my shoulder is already injured," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a pleading whisper that nonetheless carried to where Jack stood 20 feet away. "The doctor said I need to keep it immobilized. Please, you're making it worse." "Oh, for Christ's sake," Andrew interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "You fell during a goddamn photo shoot because you weren't paying attention. Stop acting like you're some fragile victim. You're a Fortune 500 CEO, Rachel. Act like it." He yanked her arm again, and this time Rachel cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound of pain that cut through the terminal's ambient noise like a knife. "Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt." The words hung in the air, and for a moment the entire section of the terminal seemed to freeze. Jack felt something cold and hard settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd gotten in Helmand Province when the convoy ahead hit an IED, that crystalline moment of clarity where time slowed down and you realized you were the only thing standing between disaster and catastrophe. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. Jack looked down at his daughter and saw the confusion and fear in her eyes. Sophie had been raised on kindness and gentle words, on bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes, on the understanding that people should help each other. She had never seen violence up close, and Jack had spent 5 years making sure she never would. But she was seeing something now that troubled her in a way she couldn't articulate: the sight of a woman in distress and a world full of adults who turned away. "Stay right here, baby girl," Jack said softly, guiding Sophie to sit on their luggage. "Don't move, okay? Daddy needs to help someone." "Is that lady in trouble?" Sophie asked. "Yeah, sweetie, she is." "Are you going to use your medic skills?" Despite everything, Jack felt a small smile tug at his lips. "Something like that." He crossed the distance to Andrew and Rachel in 6 long strides, his movements deliberate and controlled. Years of military training had taught him that violence was often like fire. It fed on panic and chaos, but could be contained by calm and purpose. He didn't run, didn't shout, didn't make any aggressive movements. He simply walked up to them and positioned himself between Rachel and Andrew with the kind of physical presence that couldn't be ignored. "Hey there," Jack said, his voice conversational but with an undertone of steel. "Sounds like the lady needs some space. How about you let go of her arm?" Andrew's face flushed red, his jaw clenching as he assessed this interruption to his control. "This is none of your business, friend. This is a private conversation between me and my fiancée." "Funny thing about conversations," Jack replied, his tone still measured. "They usually don't require physical force. So I'm going to ask you again. Let go of her arm." For a moment, Andrew seemed to consider escalation. Jack could see it in his eyes, the calculation of a man who had probably never been in a real fight in his life, but had enough ego to think he could win one. Jack had seen that look before, usually on young lieutenants fresh out of West Point who thought their rank made them invincible. Reality had a way of correcting that misconception quickly. "Do you have any idea who we are?" Andrew said, his voice taking on that particular smugness that came from wealth and privilege. "Do you know who you're talking to?" "Honestly, don't care," Jack said. "All I see is a man hurting a woman in a public place, and all I'm asking is that you stop." "Andrew, please," Rachel said, and Jack noticed she had used the moment of distraction to pull partially free from Andrew's grasp. Let's just go our separate ways. I'll catch a commercial flight tomorrow. You take the charter. We can talk when we've both calmed down. We'll talk now, Andrew snarled, reaching for her again. Jack moved with the fluid economy of motion that came from years of dealing with combative patients in emergency situations. He didn't strike Andrew, didn't even touch him aggressively. He simply intercepted Andrew's reaching hand with his own, applying just enough pressure to a specific pressure point on Andrew's wrist to make the man's entire arm go momentarily numb. That's not going to happen, Jack said quietly. Ma'am, you're injured. Can you walk? Rachel stared at him with wide eyes. Beautiful hazel eyes, Jack noticed distantly, that were currently flooded with a mixture of fear, relief, and confusion. Yes, I can walk. Then I suggest you step over here behind me, Jack said, maintaining his grip on Andrew's wrist while using his body as a barrier. Sir, I'm going to let go now, and you're going to walk away. Nobody needs to get hurt here. You're assaulting me, Andrew spat. I'll have you arrested. Security! As if summoned by the magic word, 2 airport security officers were already approaching, having been alerted by witnesses who had apparently found it easier to report the situation than to intervene directly. What's going on here? The larger of the 2 security officers asked, his hand resting on his radio. Andrew immediately shifted gears, his face transforming from rage to wounded innocence. Officer, thank God. This man just attacked me unprovoked. I was having a private conversation with my fiancée, and he physically assaulted me. That's not what happened, came a voice from behind them. Jack turned to see an older woman in a business suit stepping forward. I saw the whole thing. That man in the expensive suit was hurting her. She pointed at Rachel. He was dragging her through the terminal, and she was crying out that he was hurting her. This gentleman stepped in to help. That's what I saw too, another voice chimed in, a younger man with headphones around his neck. Dude in the suit was being aggressive as hell. This guy just broke it up. More voices joined in, and Jack realized that while no one had been willing to physically intervene, plenty of people had been watching and recording on their phones. In the age of viral videos and social media justice, sometimes the cavalry arrived in the form of digital witnesses. The security officer turned to Rachel. Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Rachel seemed to struggle with the answer, her eyes flicking between Andrew, Jack, and the growing crowd of onlookers. Jack could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the weighing of truth against consequence, of momentary safety against long-term complications. I'm fine, she said finally, her voice steadier than it had been moments before. Just a misunderstanding between my fiancé and myself. Nothing to worry about. Rachel, Jack started, then stopped himself. He wasn't her savior. He was just a bystander who couldn't walk away. If she wanted to go back to this man, if she wanted to minimize what had just happened, that was her choice. He'd seen it before with domestic situations, the victim protecting the abuser, minimizing the harm, making excuses. It made him sick, but he understood it. Leaving was sometimes harder than staying. Ma'am, with all due respect, the security officer said, his tone gentler now. We have multiple witnesses saying this man was physically hurting you. Even if you don't want to press charges, we need to file a report, and I'm going to have to ask you both to come with us to answer some questions. That won't be necessary, Andrew said smoothly, his composure returning now that he felt he had regained control of the situation. We're leaving. Our private charter is waiting. Come on, Rachel. Actually, sir, you're not going anywhere until we sort this out, the second security officer said, moving to block Andrew's path. And I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you. The situation escalated quickly from there. Andrew's smooth veneer cracked as he realized he wasn't going to simply walk away. His voice rose, threats about lawyers and lawsuits flew, and within minutes, the local police had been called to supplement airport security. Rachel stood frozen in the middle of it all, looking like a deer caught in headlights, her injured shoulder held carefully against her body. Jack started to back away, intending to return to Sophie and let the authorities handle the situation. He'd done what he could. But as he turned, Rachel's voice stopped him. Wait. She moved toward him, stumbling slightly in her heels. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Jack Miller, ma'am. He extended his hand carefully, aware of her injury, She took it with her good hand, and her grip was surprisingly firm despite the tremor running through her. Rachel Morgan, thank you for stepping in. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did, Jack said simply. You were hurt and asking for help. That's all that mattered. Rachel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Most people just walked by. I could see them looking, but no one— Her voice broke slightly. No one stopped. I know, Jack said quietly. People get scared. Don't want to get involved, but that doesn't make it right. Sir? One of the police officers approached. I'm going to need to get a statement from you as well. Won't take long. Jack nodded, then looked back toward where he'd left Sophie. His daughter was sitting exactly where he'd told her to stay, but her face was anxious, her eyes locked on him. He raised a hand to wave at her, trying to communicate that everything was okay. The next hour was a blur of questions, statements, and witness accounts. Andrew was detained for questioning, his threats about lawyers growing more shrill as the reality of the situation sank in. Rachel gave her statement in a quiet, controlled voice, carefully omitting certain details but no longer minimizing what had happened. Jack learned she was Rachel Morgan, CEO of Morgan Technologies, a name even he recognized from business news segments he half-watched while making dinner. She was wealthy, powerful, and apparently engaged to Andrew Koufax, who served as her company's chief financial officer. Small world, Jack muttered to himself when he overheard this information. The billionaire CEO and the single dad Navy medic, not exactly social circles that typically overlapped. By the time the police were finished with statements, it was nearly 9 p.m. Sophie had been brought over by a kind TSA agent who had given her a bag of pretzels and let her color with markers in the security office. She was tired, hungry, and confused, but she lit up when she saw Jack. Daddy! She ran to him and he caught her up in his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Hey, baby girl, I'm sorry that took so long. Did you help the lady? Sophie asked. I tried to, yeah. Is she okay now? Jack looked over Sophie's head to where Rachel sat on a bench, looking lost and alone despite being surrounded by security personnel and police officers. Andrew had been escorted to a different area, and Jack had overheard something about charges being considered for assault and public disturbance. I don't know, sweetheart, Jack said honestly. I hope so. Can we go home now? I'm really hungry. Jack checked his phone and saw 17 missed calls from work, along with a text from his supervisor asking if he was okay. Their flight had been canceled hours ago due to the incoming storm, and all other flights were grounded until morning at the earliest. Yeah, we can go home, Jack said, making the decision quickly. They'd been supposed to fly to Baltimore for a long weekend with his sister's family, but that plan was shot now. Let's get out of here and find some real food. He was heading toward the exit, Sophie's hand in his and their luggage rolling behind them, when he heard his name called. Mr. Miller? Jack? He turned to find Rachel hurrying toward him, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She'd retrieved her coat and purse from somewhere, and she looked more composed now, though her face was pale and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. Ms. Morgan, Jack said, stopping. You okay? She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I don't have anywhere to go tonight. My flight is canceled, and Andrew, he booked everything. The hotel reservations are in his name. The charter flight was his arrangement. I can't— Her voice wavered. I can't go back to those places. Not now, not after all this. And I just realized I left my phone in Andrew's briefcase when we were arguing earlier, so I can't even call my assistant or— She stopped, taking a shaky breath. Jack watched her carefully, his medic's eye noting the signs of shock settling in. The pale skin, the trembling hands, the rapid breathing barely held in check. Ma'am, I think you need to sit down, Jack said gently. When's the last time you ate something? Rachel blinked at him. I had coffee this morning, I think. There was a breakfast meeting, but I didn't eat because Andrew was upset about the board presentation and— She stopped again, seeming to realize how ridiculous she sounded. I haven't eaten today. At all. Okay, Jack said, making another quick decision that his more cautious self would probably question later. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with us, get some food in you, and figure out your next move. You're in shock, you're injured, and you need to take care of yourself before you make any big decisions. Rachel stared at him. You're inviting me. Where exactly? To get dinner first, then. Jack trailed off, realizing the complication. Do you have access to any credit cards that aren't connected to Andrew? I have my business card, Rachel said slowly. But the storm, I heard them say all the hotels near the airport are booked solid because of the cancellations. Jack ran a hand through his hair, knowing he was about to do something either incredibly kind or incredibly stupid. Look, I have a 2-bedroom apartment about 30 minutes from here. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. Sophie and I were supposed to be away this weekend, so the guest room is made up. You can stay there tonight, get some rest, and figure things out in the morning when your head is clearer. He watched Rachel's face cycle through a series of emotions: surprise, suspicion, calculation, and finally something that looked like desperate hope mixed with shame at being in a position to need such an offer. I couldn't possibly, she started. Sure you can, Jack interrupted. Look, Miss Morgan, Rachel, please. Rachel, Jack corrected. I'm a father, a medic, and I live a pretty boring life. I'm not a threat to you. You need a safe place tonight, and I'm offering one. No strings, no expectations. Tomorrow morning, you'll make some calls, get your life sorted out, and go on your way. But tonight, you need food, rest, and to get that shoulder looked at properly. The doctor said it's just a bad sprain, Rachel said automatically, from falling during a photo shoot last week. Jack said, his tone making it clear he knew exactly what kind of fall she was talking about. And I bet that doctor told you to keep it immobilized and avoid any further trauma to the area, right? Rachel's silence was answer enough. Sophie tugged on Jack's sleeve. Daddy, is the pretty lady going to have dinner with us? Rachel's face softened as she looked down at Sophie for the first time. Hi there, she said gently. What's your name? Sophie Marie Miller, Sophie announced proudly. I'm 8 years old and I'm in 3rd grade. I'm good at math and reading, but I don't like social studies very much because it's boring. Mr. Hopscotch thinks so too. She held up her stuffed rabbit. It's very nice to meet you, Sophie, Rachel said, and Jack saw her expression shift into something more genuine, less guarded. Mr. Hopscotch is very handsome. He's a boy rabbit, Sophie explained seriously. Daddy won him for me at a carnival when I was 3. That was before Mommy went away. Jack winced internally at Sophie's casual mention of her mother, but Rachel handled it with grace, simply nodding as if this were perfectly normal information to share with a stranger in an airport. Well, any rabbit chosen by your daddy must be very special, Rachel said. Sophie nodded emphatically. He is. So are you going to come to dinner with us? Because you look hungry, and Daddy says hungry people make bad decisions. That's why we always have snacks in my backpack. Despite everything, the stress, the pain, the public humiliation of the last hour, Rachel laughed. It was a small, slightly broken sound, but it was genuine. You know what, Sophie? I think dinner with you and your daddy sounds like the best idea I've heard all day. Jack felt something in his chest loosen slightly. All right then. But first, we need to get you checked out by the airport medical staff. That shoulder needs to be looked at properly. I'm fine, Rachel started to protest. Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm a trained combat medic with 15 years of experience. You're not fine. You're holding that shoulder at an unnatural angle, you're pale as a sheet, and you're running on adrenaline and coffee. So we're going to the medical station. We're going to make sure nothing's seriously damaged, and then we're going to get food. Clear? There was something in Jack's voice, not unkind, but absolutely firm, that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. It was the same tone he'd used with wounded Marines who insisted they were fine to keep fighting despite bleeding through their uniforms. Rachel studied him for a long moment, and Jack got the sense she wasn't used to being told what to do. But finally, she nodded. Clear, she said softly. The airport medical station was a small, sterile room staffed by a bored-looking physician's assistant who perked up at the prospect of an actual patient. Jack stood by while Rachel was examined, Sophie sitting in a chair and swinging her legs while she hummed to herself. Moderate sprain of the AC joint, the PA concluded after a thorough examination and some basic range of motion tests. Someone's been aggravating it. I'm going to give you a proper sling, some ice packs, and a prescription for anti-inflammatories. You need to keep this immobilized for at least a week, preferably 2. No lifting, no repetitive motion, and for God's sake, no one should be grabbing or pulling on this arm." "Understood," Rachel said quietly. "I'm serious," the PA continued. "You keep re-injuring this, and you're going to be looking at surgery and months of physical therapy. Take care of it now or pay for it later." They left the medical station with Rachel properly slung and carrying a small bag of ice packs. Jack's car, a slightly battered Honda Civic that had seen better days but still ran reliably, was in the long-term parking lot. The drive home was quiet, with Sophie dozing in the back seat and Rachel staring out the window at the storm clouds rolling in. "I should tell you," Rachel said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I'm not a damsel in distress. What you saw tonight, that's not who I am. I built a billion-dollar company from scratch. I have an MBA from Stanford. I've given keynote speeches to tens of thousands of people. I'm not some weak woman who needs rescuing." Jack kept his eyes on the road. "Never thought you were. Strong people can still need help sometimes. Doesn't make you weak, just makes you human. Andrew and I, it's complicated. We've been together for 3 years, business partners for 5. He's not usually like this. It's just been stressful lately with the merger negotiations and the board pressure, and you don't have to explain yourself to me," Jack interrupted gently. "Not tonight. Tonight, you just need to rest." Rachel fell silent again, and when Jack glanced over at a red light, he saw tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't make a sound, didn't sob or gasp, just silent tears that spoke of exhaustion and relief and shame all mixed together. His apartment was in a modest complex in a working-class neighborhood. Not dangerous, but not upscale either. The kind of place where families scraped by and neighbors looked out for each other because everyone understood what it meant to struggle. Jack carried Sophie inside first, her head on his shoulder, and then returned to help Rachel with her minimal luggage, just the designer purse and coat she'd been carrying. "Welcome to Casa Miller," Jack said, unlocking the door to a small 2-bedroom apartment. "It's not much, but it's home." Rachel stepped inside and looked around with visible surprise. Whatever she'd been expecting, bachelor squalor, perhaps, or utilitarian bleakness, it wasn't what she found. The apartment was small but meticulously organized. The furniture was secondhand but well-maintained. The walls were covered with Sophie's artwork, crayon drawings, watercolor paintings, school projects. A small bookshelf held a combination of medical textbooks, military thrillers, and children's books. The kitchen was spotless, and Jack noticed Rachel's gaze linger on the refrigerator, which was covered in Sophie's spelling tests and math homework, all marked with perfect scores and teacher comments like, "Wonderful work," and "Sophie is such a joy in class." "I'm going to put Sophie to bed," Jack said, hefting his daughter's sleeping form. "Guest room is through there." He nodded toward a door off the living room. "Bathroom's attached. Clean towels are in the cabinet. Make yourself comfortable. I'll be out in a few minutes, and we'll order some food." He disappeared down the hallway, and Rachel was left alone in the small living room. She moved slowly, taking in the details of this stranger's life. There were no photos of Sophie's mother anywhere. Rachel had already noticed that. But there were dozens of photos of Sophie herself, charting her growth from a chubby toddler to the bright-eyed 8-year-old she was now. In some of the photos, Jack wore a Navy uniform, looking younger and harder edged. There was a shadow box on the wall containing military medals and commendations, including a Purple Heart. Rachel sank down onto the couch, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer normalcy of it all. This was what a home looked like, not the sterile perfection of her penthouse in San Francisco, where every piece of furniture was designer-selected and every surface was maintained by a cleaning service. This was lived-in, loved-in space. This was real. She didn't realize she was crying again until Jack reappeared from Sophie's room and handed her a box of tissues without comment. "Sorry," Rachel said, wiping her eyes. I'm not usually like this. Like I said, you're in shock. It's okay to fall apart a little." Jack settled into an armchair across from her. "So, food. What sounds good? There's a decent Italian place that delivers, or Chinese, or if you want something lighter, there's a Mediterranean place that does great salads and grilled chicken." "I don't care," Rachel said honestly. "Anything, everything. God, I'm starving." Jack pulled out his phone and started placing an order. "Any allergies I should know about?" Dietary restrictions? No. Well, I usually avoid carbs and gluten, but Rachel stopped herself, hearing how ridiculous that sounded. Never mind. Tonight, I don't care. Order whatever's good. Jack ordered enough food for a small army: pasta, chicken, salad, bread, soup. Leftovers, he explained when he saw her raised eyebrow. Sophie and I will eat it for the next few days. Plus, I've learned that when people say they're not hungry, they usually end up eating more than they expect once food appears. While they waited for the delivery, Jack made tea, actual tea in actual mugs, not the fancy loose-leaf stuff Rachel usually drank, but cheap tea bags from the grocery store that somehow tasted perfect. He also brought out the ice packs from the medical station and helped Rachel position them properly on her shoulder. "You're good at this," Rachel observed, watching him work with practiced efficiency. 15 years of practice, Jack said. Navy medic for 10 years, emergency room trauma nurse for the last 5. Taking care of people is pretty much all I know how to do. "Why did you leave the Navy?" Rachel asked, then immediately shook her head. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "It's fine," Jack said, settling back into his chair. Sophie's mom left when Sophie was 3. She wasn't cut out for military life. Too much moving, too much uncertainty, too much me being deployed. One day I came back from a 9-month tour in Afghanistan, and she was just gone. Left divorce papers and a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. Didn't want custody, didn't want visitation, just wanted out. "I'm sorry," Rachel said softly. Jack shrugged. "Took me a while to stop being angry about it. But honestly, Sophie's better off. Her mom wasn't happy, and kids can sense that. Now it's just me and Sophie, and we make it work. I took an early discharge, moved to a place where I could give her stability, got a job that has regular hours. It's not the life I planned, but it's a good life." "She's lucky to have you," Rachel said. "I'm lucky to have her," Jack corrected. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything I do is for her." The food arrived, and they spread it out on Jack's small dining table. Rachel discovered she was absolutely ravenous and made her way through pasta, chicken, salad, and half a loaf of garlic bread with an enthusiasm that would have mortified her in any other circumstance. But Jack didn't judge, didn't comment, just kept refilling her water glass and making sure she ate slowly enough not to make herself sick. "When's the last time you just sat and ate a meal?" Jack asked at one point. Rachel had to think about it. "I honestly don't remember. Business lunches, maybe? But those are all about networking and deal-making. I usually pick at a salad while everyone else talks. Dinners are usually the same, or I eat at my desk while reviewing reports." "That's not eating," Jack said. "That's just fuel consumption. There's a difference." "Is there?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious. "Yeah," Jack said, gesturing to the table between them. "This is eating, sitting down, taking your time, actually tasting the food. No phones, no TV, no distractions, just the act of nourishing yourself. Sophie and I do this every night. It's our rule, dinner together, no matter what." Rachel looked at the simple meal spread between them and felt something crack inside her chest. "I've forgotten how to do this," she said quietly. "I've forgotten how to just be." "It's not too late to remember," Jack said. They talked late into the night, or rather, Rachel talked and Jack listened. She told him about Morgan Technologies, about the cancer detection software her team had developed that could save millions of lives, but was being shelved because it wasn't profitable enough. She told him about her half-brother Richard and his schemes to take over the company. She told him about Andrew and their engagement, how he'd been charming at first, supportive of her work, but how things had changed over the past year as he'd gained more power within her company. "He wants me to marry him and sign a prenup that gives him controlling interest in the company if anything happens to our marriage," Rachel said. "Says it's about protecting both of our interests. But I've seen the contract. It's structured so that he gets everything and I get nothing if I ever try to leave." "And you're still engaged to this guy?" Jack asked, his tone carefully neutral. "It's complicated," Rachel said again. "He knows where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking. If I break off the engagement, he could cause serious damage to the company. Plus, the board loves him. They think he's the stable, rational one, and I'm the temperamental, creative genius who needs a handler." "Sounds like a great guy," Jack said dryly. Rachel laughed, another one of those broken, genuine sounds. Yeah, he's a real catch. I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking you needed someone, Jack said quietly. People make all kinds of bad decisions when they're lonely. Is that why you joined the Navy? Rachel asked. Because you were lonely? Maybe, Jack admitted. I grew up in foster care. Never knew my real parents. Aged out of the system at 18 with no family, no connections, no plan. The Navy offered structure, purpose, a sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And then I met Sophie's mom, thought I'd found a partner who understood that life. Turned out I was wrong, but I got Sophie out of it, so I can't regret it too much. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The remains of dinner spread between them, and the sound of rain starting to patter against the windows as the storm finally arrived. I should let you get some rest, Jack said finally, standing and starting to clear the table. You've had a hell of a day. Jack, Rachel said as he was loading the dishwasher. Why did you help me? Really? You have your daughter to think about. You could have just walked away like everyone else. Why didn't you? Jack paused, his hands stilling on a plate. My mom, my biological mom, whoever she was, she left me in a hospital when I was 2 days old, just walked away. Growing up, I used to wonder what would have happened if someone had stepped in, if someone had helped her instead of judging her. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she needed someone to tell her it was going to be okay. But no one did, and she left, and I spent 18 years in a system that was supposed to protect me, but mostly just shuffled me around. He turned to face Rachel, his expression serious. I promised myself that if I ever saw someone who needed help, I'd be the person who stepped in. I'd be the someone who gave a damn. Because maybe if someone had done that for my mom, my life would have been different, and even if it wouldn't have changed anything, at least I'd know that in that moment someone cared enough to try. Rachel felt tears welling up again. You're a good man, Jack Miller. I'm just a man who tries, Jack said simply. That's all any of us can do. Now come on, let me show you where everything is in the guest room. You need sleep. The guest room was small but cozy, with a comfortable bed covered in a handmade quilt and walls painted a soft blue. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the nightstand, something Jack must have bought for their planned weekend guests. Sophie picked those out earlier this week, Jack explained, following Rachel's gaze. She insisted her cousins would want flowers in their room. She's very into making people feel welcome. She's a special kid, Rachel said. Yeah, Jack agreed, his voice soft with pride. She really is. Bathroom's through that door. There are spare toiletries in the cabinet, and I'll leave some clean clothes outside the door. They'll be too big, but better than sleeping in a business suit. If you need anything in the night, I'm just down the hall. Don't hesitate to wake me. Thank you, Rachel said, the words feeling inadequate for what he'd done. For everything. I don't know how I'll ever— You don't have to repay me, Jack interrupted gently. That's not how kindness works. You just accept it, let yourself heal, and then you go do something kind for someone else when you get the chance. That's how we make the world better, one small act at a time. After Jack left, closing the door softly behind him, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the small room. Outside, rain was falling in earnest now, drumming against the window with a steady rhythm. In the distance, she could hear the sound of Jack moving around the apartment, locking doors, turning off lights, settling in for the night. She changed into the oversized t-shirt and sweatpants Jack had left outside her door, both smelling like laundry detergent and sunshine, and carefully positioned herself in the bed so as not to aggravate her shoulder. The sheets were soft and worn, the blanket heavy and warm. The pillow smelled like lavender, probably from one of those sachets people put in linen closets. Rachel Morgan, CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, lay in a stranger's guest room in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood and felt safer than she had in years. Not because of locks on the doors or security systems, but because of something more fundamental, the presence of someone who had chosen kindness over convenience, action over apathy. She thought about Andrew, probably sitting in an airport security office answering questions and plotting his revenge. She thought about her company, her empire, all the things she'd built and sacrificed for. She thought about the life she'd constructed so carefully, the penthouse, the wardrobe, the carefully curated public image of the brilliant, unflappable CEO who had it all together. And then she thought about Jack, washing dishes in his small kitchen before checking on his sleeping daughter. She thought about Sophie, who had welcomed a stranger with open arms because that's what her father had taught her, that people deserved kindness. She thought about the apartment full of crayon drawings and perfect spelling tests and photos of a family of two who had made a home out of love rather than luxury. For the first time in years, Rachel let herself cry, really cry. Not the controlled tears she'd allowed herself earlier, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere in her chest she'd forgotten existed. She cried for the girl she used to be before she learned that success meant sacrificing everything else. She cried for the woman she'd become, so focused on building an empire that she'd forgotten to build a life. She cried for all the choices she'd made that had led her to a moment where a stranger's kindness felt more real than anything in her carefully constructed world. And somewhere in the middle of those tears, exhaustion overtook her, and Rachel fell asleep in a stranger's guest room with rain falling outside and the knowledge that tomorrow she would have to face all the complications of her real life. But tonight, just for tonight, she was safe. Down the hall, Jack checked on Sophie one more time, adjusting her blankets and removing Mr. Hopscotch from where he'd fallen onto the floor. His daughter slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams 8-year-olds dreamed. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of everything she'd witnessed that evening. Tomorrow, he'd need to talk to her about what had happened at the airport. He'd need to explain, in age-appropriate terms, about how sometimes adults made bad choices and how important it was to help people even when it was uncomfortable. He'd need to make sure this experience didn't traumatize her or make her afraid of the world. But tonight, he just watched his daughter sleep and thanked whatever powers existed in the universe that she was his, this bright, kind, fearless little girl who saw the best in people and believed that helping others was simply what you did. Jack closed Sophie's door quietly and returned to the living room, where he sank into his armchair and finally allowed himself to think about the day's events. He'd probably overstepped. Taking in a stranger, even one in obvious distress, was risky. He'd exposed Sophie to a situation that could have been dangerous. He'd inserted himself into problems that weren't his own. But looking at the empty plates on the table, remembering the look of genuine peace that had crossed Rachel's face when she'd laughed at Sophie's jokes, thinking about how she'd cried in relief when someone had finally just offered her a safe place to rest, Jack couldn't regret it. This was who he was. For better or worse, he was the man who stepped in, the man who couldn't walk away, the man who believed that sometimes the right thing to do was simply to give a damn. Outside, the storm settled in for the night, rain falling steady and soft. Inside the small apartment, 3 people slept, a single father who'd built a home from nothing but love and determination, his bright daughter, who saw the world as it could be rather than as it was, and a billionaire CEO who'd forgotten what home felt like until a stranger had shown her. None of them knew yet how this night would change everything. None of them knew that this moment, this small act of kindness in an airport terminal, would ripple outward in ways they couldn't imagine. None of them knew that sometimes the greatest rescues weren't from danger, but from loneliness. But in the morning, they would start to understand. In the morning, the real work of rebuilding would begin. In the morning, Rachel would have to face her life, Jack would have to explain to his daughter what had happened, and Sophie would teach both of them what it meant to trust in the fundamental goodness of people. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they all just slept, safe in the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the world worked the way it should. Sometimes people helped each other. Sometimes kindness won. Sometimes the person standing alone in a crowd found exactly the right stranger to notice they needed help. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. Morning arrived with the gentle persistence of sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains. Rachel woke slowly, disoriented by the absence of her usual surroundings. No floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, no silk sheets, no ambient city noise filtering up from 40 stories below. Instead, she heard birds chirping outside, the distant sound of children playing, and something else. Singing. A child's voice, slightly off-key but enthusiastic, belting out what sounded like a song from a Disney movie. Rachel sat up carefully, mindful of her injured shoulder, and took in her surroundings in the full light of day. The guest room was even more charming than she'd realized last night. The handmade quilt covering her was stitched in a pattern of stars and moons. clearly crafted with care rather than purchased from some high-end boutique. The walls held a few simple prints: a lighthouse, a sailboat, a sunset over water. Nothing expensive, but everything chosen with intention. She checked the nightstand for her phone before remembering she didn't have it. The realization sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She'd been tethered to that device for years, checking emails before her eyes were fully open, responding to messages before she'd even gotten out of bed. The phantom weight of it in her hand was almost physical. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Ms. Morgan, you awake?" Jack's voice was quiet, respectful of the early hour. "Yes, come in," Rachel called, suddenly self-conscious about her borrowed clothes and sleep-mussed hair. Jack entered carrying a tray with coffee, toast, and what looked like scrambled eggs. He'd clearly been up for a while. He was showered and dressed in jeans and a simple navy blue t-shirt, his hair still damp. "Figured you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the nightstand. "Sophie's already had breakfast and is currently teaching Mr. Hopscotch the choreography to some movie she watched last night. Fair warning, she's been asking about you every 5 minutes since she woke up at 6:30. Rachel accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her good hand around the warm mug. "You didn't have to do this. Bring me breakfast in bed like I'm some kind of invalid." "You're injured and you're a guest," Jack said simply. "Besides, I've been up since 5:30. Old military habits die hard. This is actually me sleeping in." Rachel took a sip of coffee and nearly moaned. It wasn't fancy, just regular drip coffee, but it was hot and strong and exactly what she needed. "What time is it?" "Almost 8. I called the hospital and told them I needed a personal day. They weren't happy about it, but they'll manage. Figured you might need some help sorting things out this morning." Jack leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, but his eyes assessing her with that medic's attention to detail. "How's the shoulder?" "Sore," Rachel admitted, "but better than yesterday." The ice helped. "Good. I've got more ice packs ready when you need them, and your prescription should be ready for pickup at the pharmacy down the street. But first, we need to figure out your immediate situation. Do you need to make any calls? I can lend you my phone." The thought of calling anyone filled Rachel with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. "I should call my assistant, Laura. Let her know I'm okay. She's probably been trying to reach me since yesterday." "Probably been seeing news coverage too," Jack said carefully. Airport incident involving a high-profile CEO and her CFO made the local news this morning. They're not releasing names yet, but God, Rachel breathed, setting down her coffee. The board is going to lose their minds. Richard is probably already spinning this to his advantage. And Andrew, she stopped, not wanting to think about what Andrew was doing or planning. "One thing at a time," Jack said, his voice carrying that same steadying quality from last night. "Eat something first. Make your calls. Then we figure out next steps. You can't solve everything on an empty stomach." He left her to eat, and Rachel found herself once again struck by the simplicity of his kindness. No agenda, no manipulation, just straightforward care. She ate the eggs and toast mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already racing through the complications of her situation. When she emerged from the guest room 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in her wrinkled business suit from yesterday, she found Sophie at the kitchen table surrounded by crayons and paper. "You're awake," Sophie announced happily, abandoning her artwork to bounce over to Rachel. "Daddy said you needed to sleep because you had a very hard day yesterday. Did you sleep good? Do you like pancakes?" "Daddy makes really good pancakes on Saturdays, but today's Friday, so we had eggs. But tomorrow we can have pancakes if you're still here. Are you still going to be here tomorrow?" "Sophie, breathe," Jack called from where he was loading the dishwasher. "Give Ms. Morgan a chance to wake up fully before you interrogate her." "I'm not Sophie struggled with the word. "Interrogating," Jack supplied. "I'm not that. I'm just being friendly. Right, Ms. Morgan?" Rachel felt something warm bloom in her chest at Sophie's earnest face. "You're being very friendly, Sophie, and yes, I slept very well, thank you. Your guest room is lovely." "Daddy made it nice for when people visit," Sophie explained, tugging Rachel toward the table to show off her drawings. "But people don't visit very much because Daddy works a lot, and I have school and activities. But sometimes Aunt Marie and Uncle Tom come with my cousins, and that's who was supposed to visit this weekend, but the storm canceled their flight. That's why Daddy's home today, because we were supposed to be away. I see, Rachel said, studying the drawings spread across the table. They were surprisingly good for an 8-year-old. Detailed pictures of flowers, houses, and what appeared to be superhero characters. These are beautiful, Sophie. You're very talented. Sophie beamed. Thank you. I like to draw. Daddy says I get it from my mom, but I don't really remember her very much. She left when I was little. But that's okay because Daddy says some people aren't meant to be parents, and the people who stay are the ones who really love you. Rachel's eyes flicked to Jack, who was carefully not looking at them, focused intently on wiping down the already clean counter. She wondered how many times he'd had to explain his ex-wife's abandonment to his daughter, how many times he'd had to spin a painful truth into something a child could understand without feeling rejected. Your daddy is very wise, Rachel said softly. I know, Sophie agreed matter-of-factly. He's the smartest person I know, except maybe for my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, but she's really old, so she's had more time to learn things. Daddy, can Miss Morgan stay for pancakes tomorrow? That's up to Miss Morgan, baby girl. She has her own life to get back to. Rachel looked between father and daughter and felt the weight of her real world pressing in. I should probably head back to San Francisco today. I have a lot to sort out. Do you have to? Sophie's face fell. I was going to show you my room. I have a telescope that Daddy got me for my birthday, and I know all the constellations. Well, not all of them, but most of the important ones. And Mr. Hopscotch really likes you. He doesn't usually like new people, but he told me this morning that you're nice. Sophie, Jack said gently, Ms. Morgan is a very busy lady. She runs a huge company with lots of people depending on her. But you said yesterday that helping people is more important than being busy, Sophie protested. And Miss Morgan needs help because that mean man was hurting her. So shouldn't we keep helping? Rachel felt her throat tighten at the simple logic of a child who saw the world in such clear terms. People needed help, so you helped them. There were no calculations about inconvenience or risk, no weighing of obligations against desires, just pure, uncomplicated compassion. Sophie has a point, Jack said, and Rachel caught the hint of a smile playing at his lips. Though I think what she's really saying is that she likes having you here and isn't ready to say goodbye yet. Is it okay to say that? Sophie asked, looking worried. Daddy always says I should be honest about my feelings, but also that I shouldn't make people feel bad. Am I making you feel bad, Ms. Morgan? Not at all, Rachel said, and was surprised to find it was true. Actually, it's one of the nicest things anyone has said to me in a long time. Then you'll stay? Sophie's face lit up with hope. Rachel started, then stopped. What was she rushing back to, really? A company in crisis? A board that didn't trust her? A fiancé who had assaulted her in public? The penthouse she called home, but had never felt like one. I need to make some phone calls first. Figure out what kind of damage control needs to happen. You can use my phone, Jack offered. And the guest room is yours as long as you need it. No pressure, no expectations. But Sophie's right. Sometimes the best thing to do is slow down and let yourself heal before jumping back into chaos. Rachel nodded, accepting Jack's phone and retreating to the guest room for privacy. Her first call was to Laura Chen, her executive assistant, and the only person at Morgan Technologies Rachel truly trusted. Laura answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. Hello? Laura, it's Rachel. Oh, thank God, Laura breathed. Rachel, what the hell happened? I've been trying to call you for hours. There are reports about some incident at Newark Airport, and when you didn't show up for this morning's conference call with the Tokyo investors, everyone started freaking out. Richard's been in my office 3 times asking where you are, and Andrew... She paused. Andrew's lawyers called. They're claiming you had some kind of breakdown and that Andrew was trying to help you when you became violent. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. Of course Andrew would spin it that way. Of course he'd get ahead of the narrative. Laura, I need you to listen carefully. I'm fine, physically, I mean. But I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it quietly. Anything, you know that. I need you to pull all of Andrew's financial transactions through the company for the last 18 months. Not the public-facing stuff, the actual detailed records. Expense reports, wire transfers, consulting fees, everything. and I need you to look specifically for anything involving Richard or any of the board members who've been pushing for the merger with K-Fax Tech." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Rachel, if you're looking for what I think you're looking for, I need to warn you that Andrew has a lot of protection built into his position. He's CFO. He has board approval for most of his actions. And I know," Rachel interrupted. "But I also know Andrew. He's smart, but he's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He's going to have made a mistake somewhere, left a trail. I need you to find it." "Okay," Laura said slowly. "But Rachel, this is going to take time. And if Andrew finds out I'm digging into his finances, he won't find out. Tell anyone who asks that you're doing routine audit prep. Use your personal laptop, not the company system. And Laura, send everything to my personal email, not the company one. I don't trust that Andrew doesn't have access to it." "Where are you right now? Are you safe?" Rachel looked around the small guest room with its handmade quilt and simple furnishings. "Yeah," she said softly. "Actually, I think I might be safer than I've been in a long time, but I need a few days to think, to figure out my next move. Can you hold down the fort without me?" "Of course, but the board meeting is scheduled for Monday morning. They're going to want answers about what happened at the airport, and if you're not there, Richard is going to use your absence to push his agenda." "Let him," Rachel said, surprising herself with the words. "Let Richard show his hand. Let the board see what he's really after. Sometimes the best way to catch someone in a trap is to let them think they've already won." "That's either brilliant or insane," Laura said. "I'm not sure which." "Maybe both," Rachel admitted. "Laura, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If I walked away from all of this, the company, the board, the merger negotiations, what would happen?" Laura was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, short-term chaos. The stock would take a hit. Richard would probably make his move to take over as CEO. The board would panic. But long-term? Rachel, Morgan Technologies would survive. You built something strong enough to outlast you. The question isn't what would happen to the company. The question is what would happen to you. Who are you if you're not CEO of Morgan Technologies?" The question hit Rachel like a physical blow. Who was she without the title, the power, the constant pressure to perform and succeed? She'd been CEO for so long that she couldn't remember what she'd wanted to be before ambition and necessity had shaped her into this role. "I don't know," Rachel whispered. "I honestly don't know." "Then maybe that's what you need to figure out," Laura said gently. "Take your few days. Do your thinking. I'll handle things here and get you the information you need. But Rachel, whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want, not what you think you're supposed to want. Life's too short to spend it all building someone else's empire." They ended the call, and Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Jack's phone in her hands. Through the closed door, she could hear Sophie's laughter and Jack's deeper voice responding to something his daughter had said. The sounds of a normal morning, a normal life, something that felt impossibly distant from the world she inhabited. Her next call was to her personal attorney, Michael Reeves, who had represented her through the divorce negotiations with her first husband years ago and had remained on retainer ever since. "Rachel, I've been expecting your call," Michael said without preamble. "I've already heard from Andrew K-Fax's legal team. They're claiming you physically assaulted him at Newark Airport and that he was defending himself. They're threatening to sue for assault and defamation, and they're suggesting that you're mentally unstable and unfit to run the company." "Of course they are," Rachel said tiredly. "Michael, I need you to get ahead of this. There were dozens of witnesses at that airport, and I'm sure several of them recorded what happened on their phones. Andrew was physically assaulting me. He grabbed my injured shoulder and refused to let go when I asked him to. A bystander intervened on my behalf, and airport security was called. Get the police report, get witness statements, get the security footage, build me a case." "I'm already on it," Michael assured her. "But Rachel, I need to tell you something. Andrew's lawyers aren't just threatening a civil suit. They're suggesting that if you try to press charges against him, they'll make this as public and ugly as possible. They'll drag your mental health history into it. The therapy you attended after your mother died, the antidepressants you were briefly prescribed." "I was grieving," Rachel interrupted, anger flooding through her. "My mother had just died of cancer. Taking antidepressants while dealing with that doesn't make me unstable." I know that, and any reasonable person knows that. But Andrew's team is betting that they can create enough doubt, enough scandal, that the board will force you out to protect the company's reputation. It's a scorched earth strategy, Rachel. They're not just trying to win, they're trying to destroy your credibility entirely. Rachel felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Then we fight back. I want you to file assault charges against Andrew. I want a restraining order. And I want you to start dissolution proceedings for our engagement. I'm done, Michael. I'm done being threatened and manipulated and told that I'm the problem when I'm the victim. Okay, Michael said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Now you're talking. I'll get started on the paperwork immediately. But Rachel, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Really ugly. Andrew has deep pockets and powerful friends. This isn't going to be a quick, clean break. I don't care, Rachel said, and meant it. I spent 3 years trying to keep the peace, trying to make a toxic relationship work because it was convenient for business. I'm done sacrificing my well-being for convenience, whatever it takes, whatever it costs. I'm done being his victim. After the call ended, Rachel sat in silence for several minutes, letting the magnitude of her decisions sink in. She'd just declared war on her fiancé and business partner, potentially jeopardizing her company in the process. It was reckless, possibly suicidal from a business standpoint, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was making a choice based on what was right, rather than what was expedient. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Rachel, everything okay in there? Jack's voice was concerned but not pushy. Yeah, she called back. Can I come out, or do I need to hide in here until I figure out how to fix my life? Pretty sure life fixing happens better with coffee and friendly company, Jack replied. Sophie's making you a welcome card. Fair warning, she's using a lot of glitter. Despite everything, Rachel smiled. She opened the door to find Jack standing in the hallway, his expression understanding in a way that suggested he'd overheard at least part of her conversations. Lawyer and assistant? He asked. Is there anything you don't notice? Years of reading people in high-stress situations, Jack said with a slight shrug. You want to talk about it? Not really, Rachel admitted. I just want to... She stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. What did she want? I just want to not be CEO Rachel Morgan for a little while. Is that possible? Absolutely, Jack said. In this apartment, you're just Rachel. No titles, no expectations. Just a person taking a break from a complicated life. He gestured toward the living room. Come on, Sophie's about to unveil her masterpiece, and trust me, you don't want to miss the presentation. She's been practicing her speech. In the living room, Sophie had indeed created a card. A piece of construction paper folded in half and covered with glitter, stickers, and crayon drawings. She stood beside the coffee table where she'd displayed it, Mr. Hopscotch tucked under one arm, looking solemn and important. Ms. Morgan, Sophie announced formally, I made you this welcome card because Daddy says that when someone is having a hard time, small kindnesses make big differences. And you're having a hard time, so I wanted to do something kind. She opened the card with a flourish, revealing a drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one medium-sized, standing in front of a house. Above them, Sophie had written in careful letters, Welcome to our home. You are safe here. Love, Sophie and Daddy, and Mr. Hopscotch. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to be doing that a lot lately, crying. But these weren't tears of despair or exhaustion. They were something else, something she couldn't quite name. This is beautiful, Sophie, Rachel said, accepting the card with her good hand. It's the most beautiful card anyone has ever made me. Really? Sophie's eyes went wide. Even more beautiful than the fancy cards at the store? Especially more beautiful than those, Rachel confirmed, because this one was made just for me, by you. That makes it priceless. Sophie beamed, then surprised Rachel by stepping forward and wrapping her arms around Rachel's waist in a gentle hug, careful to avoid her injured shoulder. I'm glad you're staying a little longer, she whispered. Daddy needs more friends. He doesn't have very many because he's always taking care of me. Over Sophie's head, Rachel met Jack's eyes and saw his embarrassment at his daughter's honesty. But she also saw the truth in Sophie's words. This kind, capable man who had saved her from Andrew was himself isolated. his whole life revolving around his daughter and his work. "Maybe I need more friends too," Rachel said softly, returning Sophie's hug. The rest of the morning passed in a comfortable rhythm that felt surreal in its normalcy. Sophie insisted on showing Rachel her room, which was exactly what you'd expect from an 8-year-old. Stuffed animals arranged on the bed, posters of movies and pop stars on the walls, and an impressive collection of books overflowing from a small bookshelf. The telescope Sophie had mentioned sat by the window, and Sophie demonstrated how to use it, pointing out landmarks in their neighborhood with the expertise of a seasoned tour guide. "That's Mrs. Chen's house," Sophie explained. "She's from China, and she's teaching me how to make dumplings. And that's the Martinez family. They have 3 kids, and the oldest one, Carlos, is in 6th grade, and he's really good at soccer. And over there is Mr. Johnson. He's really old, and sometimes Daddy helps him with his yard work because Mr. Johnson's back hurts." Rachel listened to Sophie's narration of their neighborhood and realized she couldn't name a single one of her neighbors in San Francisco. She lived in a building full of people and knew none of them. Her world was divided into business associates and service providers. No one she'd call a friend, no one she'd make dumplings with or help with yard work. Jack appeared in the doorway carrying a basket of laundry. "Sophie, you're supposed to be getting ready for your piano lesson, not giving Miss Morgan the complete oral history of our street." "But she asked," Sophie protested. "I did ask," Rachel confirmed, smiling at Jack. "Your daughter is a wealth of information." "She's something all right," Jack said with obvious affection. "Sophie, go get your music books. Mrs. Patterson will be here in 20 minutes. Sophie scampered off, and Jack turned to Rachel. "Sorry about that. She gets excited when we have visitors. Tends to overshare." "Don't apologize," Rachel said. "It's refreshing, actually. Most people I interact with are carefully managing what they say, calculating every word for maximum advantage. Sophie just says what she thinks and feels. It's honest." "That's one word for it," Jack said with a wry smile. "Her teachers call it refreshingly candid. I call it occasionally mortifying." He shifted the laundry basket on his hip. "I've got to throw this in and then run to the pharmacy to pick up your prescription. You okay here for half an hour?" "I'm fine," Rachel assured him. "Actually, I was wondering, do you mind if I help with something? Dishes, laundry, anything? I feel useless just sitting around." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're recovering from an injury and dealing with a major life crisis. You're not supposed to be useful." "But I want to be," Rachel said, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. "I want to do something normal, something productive. Something that isn't about corporate strategy or damage control. Please?" Jack studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the kitchen. "All right, there's vegetables that need chopping for tonight's dinner. Think you can handle that one-handed?" "I can try." She found herself at Jack's small kitchen counter, carefully dicing carrots and celery with her good hand while Jack sorted laundry nearby. It should have been awkward, a billionaire CEO performing basic kitchen tasks in a stranger's home. But instead, it felt peaceful. The repetitive motion of cutting vegetables, the simple goal of preparing food, the absence of phones and emails and constant demands, it was almost meditative. "You're pretty good at that," Jack observed, watching her work. "Most people who claim they can't cook usually can't handle basic prep either." "I used to cook," Rachel said, focusing on keeping her cuts even. "Back in college, my roommate and I would make dinner together a few times a week. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salads and stir-fry. But we'd talk and laugh and make a mess, and it was—" She stopped, remembering. "It was fun. I haven't thought about that in years." "What happened?" Jack asked gently. "Between college cooking and now?" "Life happened," Rachel said, "or what I thought was life. I graduated, started my company, and suddenly everything was about meetings and networking and working 80-hour weeks. Cooking became a waste of time. I could pay someone to make food faster and better, leaving me free to work. Same with cleaning, grocery shopping, everything really. I optimized my life for maximum productivity." "And how's that working out for you?" Rachel set down the knife and looked at the pile of neatly chopped vegetables. "I built a billion-dollar company," she said quietly. "And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be a person. I forgot what it feels like to make dinner with friends, to know my neighbors' names, to do something just because it's pleasant, rather than because it advances some goal." Jack was quiet for a moment, then said, You know what Sophie told me after you went to bed last night? She said you seemed sad, but not the kind of sad that comes from something bad happening. The kind of sad that comes from forgetting something important. Your daughter is 8 going on 80, Rachel said, blinking back tears. She's too perceptive for her own good. She gets it from her mom, actually, Jack said, surprising Rachel. My ex-wife. She wasn't a bad person. Just someone who realized she'd built a life that looked right on paper but felt wrong in practice. She wanted to be a Marine wife, wanted to be a mother, wanted all these things that seemed important, but when she actually had them, she discovered they weren't what she needed to be happy. So she left, and everyone judged her for it, me included, for a long time. But not anymore? Rachel asked. Not anymore, Jack confirmed. I realized she did the brave thing, actually. How many people are miserable in lives that look perfect from the outside, but they stay because leaving feels like admitting failure? She chose honesty over appearances. That takes courage, even if her timing sucked and her method hurt like hell. Rachel absorbed this, thinking about her own perfect-looking life. The CEO title, the engagement to the handsome CFO, the penthouse, and the designer clothes, and the speeches to thousands. All of it built on a foundation of exhaustion and compromise and slowly dying hope. I think I might need to be brave like that, Rachel said softly. I think I might need to walk away from things that look right, but feel wrong. Then you will, Jack said simply. When you're ready. And until then, you can stay here and chop vegetables and be reminded that there are other ways to live. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Sophie came running from her room, music books in hand. That's Mrs. Patterson. She's early. Jack went to answer the door, and Rachel heard the warm greeting between him and Sophie's piano teacher, an older woman with a kind voice who complimented Sophie's new haircut and asked about school. It was all so ordinary, so wholesome, so far removed from Rachel's world of carefully scheduled meetings and transactional relationships. While Sophie had her piano lesson in the living room, struggling through scales and simple songs with determined concentration, Rachel and Jack worked companionably in the kitchen. He showed her how he meal prepped for the week, cooking large batches of chicken and rice and vegetables that could be mixed and matched into different meals. It was practical, efficient, but also filled with small considerations. Sophie didn't like bell peppers, so those went in separate containers. Jack added extra spices to his portions, but kept Sophie's bland because she was still developing her palate. You're a good dad, Rachel observed, watching him portion out the food with practiced precision. I try, Jack said. It's the only job that really matters, you know? I could be the best medic in the world, could save 1,000 lives, but if I screw up raising Sophie, none of that matters. She's my priority. Everything else is just noise. Must be nice, Rachel said wistfully, having such clear priorities, knowing exactly what matters most. You could have that, Jack pointed out. You're not obligated to keep doing something that makes you miserable just because you've invested years in it. Sunk cost fallacy, throwing good time after bad because you can't accept that the initial investment was wasted. Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you're standing in my kitchen on a Friday morning chopping vegetables instead of running a billion-dollar company, and you look more relaxed than you probably have in years, Jack said bluntly. I think your body is trying to tell you something, and you're finally listening. From the living room came the sound of Sophie playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with painstaking care, hitting most of the right notes. Mrs. Patterson's voice offered gentle corrections and encouragement. Through the window, Rachel could see neighbors going about their ordinary days. A mail carrier making deliveries, a jogger running past, someone walking a dog. It was all so beautifully, achingly normal. And Rachel realized with sudden clarity that this simple domesticity, this quiet comfort, this sense of belonging somewhere, was what she'd been missing, not just since she'd become CEO, but for most of her life. She'd been chasing success for so long that she'd never stopped to ask herself what she actually wanted success to look like. Jack, she said softly, would it be okay if I stayed through the weekend? I know that's asking a lot, and if it's an imposition— Stay as long as you need, Jack interrupted. Seriously, the guest room's yours. Sophie will be thrilled. She's already planning to show you her favorite hiking trail and teach you the names of all the constellations. And honestly, He gave her a small smile. It's nice having another adult around. Gets lonely sometimes, just me and an 8-year-old, no matter how great that 8-year-old is. Then I'll stay, Rachel decided, just through the weekend. I need to figure some things out, and I think I can do that better here than anywhere else. What Rachel didn't say, what she was only beginning to understand herself, was that she wasn't just staying to figure out her next move regarding Andrew or the company. She was staying because for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she could breathe. She was staying because Sophie's laugh was genuine and Jack's kindness had no agenda, and the vegetables she was chopping for dinner felt more meaningful than any business deal she'd closed in years. She was staying because sometimes the best way forward was to stop running long enough to remember who you were before the world told you who you had to be. And in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, surrounded by crayon drawings and handmade quilts and the sound of a child practicing piano, Rachel Morgan, CEO, billionaire, perfectionist, began the slow, terrifying, necessary work of figuring out who she wanted to become. The weekend passed in a blur of small moments that somehow felt larger than any boardroom victory Rachel had ever experienced. Saturday morning brought pancakes just as Sophie had promised, with the 8-year-old standing on a stool beside her father at the stove, carefully pouring batter into perfect circles while narrating the entire process like a cooking show host. Rachel sat at the small kitchen table, coffee in hand, watching this domestic scene with something that felt dangerously close to longing. The secret is not to flip them too early, Sophie explained seriously, brandishing a spatula that was almost as big as her arm. You have to wait until you see bubbles on top, and then you flip them really fast so they don't break. Daddy taught me that. Your daddy seems to know a lot about cooking, Rachel observed. He had to learn, Sophie said matter-of-factly. When Mommy left, he didn't know how to make anything except sandwiches and things that came in boxes. But then he decided that I needed to eat healthy food, so he watched cooking videos on the computer every night after I went to bed. Now he can make almost anything. Jack caught Rachel's eye over Sophie's head and gave a slight shrug that somehow conveyed both embarrassment and pride. She found herself studying him in the morning light streaming through the kitchen window. This man who had rebuilt his entire life around his daughter's needs, who had taught himself to cook and braid hair and navigate parent-teacher conferences as a single father. There was something quietly heroic about it, though Rachel suspected Jack would reject that characterization entirely. After breakfast, Sophie insisted on the promised hiking trail, a modest path through a small nature preserve about 10 minutes from the apartment. Rachel borrowed a pair of Jack's old sneakers and a sweatshirt that hung loose on her frame, and they set off like some approximation of a family, though Rachel tried not to think too hard about that comparison. The trail wound through trees just beginning to turn autumn colors, past a small creek where Sophie stopped to search for interesting rocks, and up to a clearing that offered a surprisingly beautiful view of the surrounding area. It wasn't dramatic or breathtaking, nothing like the vista from Rachel's penthouse or the scenic overlooks she'd seen on business trips to exotic locations. But there was something honest about it, something real. "This is my thinking spot," Sophie announced, settling onto a flat rock and patting the space beside her for Rachel to join. "When I have big feelings or big questions, Daddy brings me here and we talk about them. He says nature helps you see things more clearly." Jack remained standing, giving them space while keeping a watchful eye on his daughter. Rachel lowered herself carefully onto the rock, mindful of her still healing shoulder. "What kind of big questions do you think about?" Rachel asked. Sophie considered this seriously. "Sometimes I wonder why my mom left. Daddy says it wasn't my fault, that some people just aren't meant to be parents. But sometimes I wonder if maybe I was too loud or too messy or too much for her." She picked up a stick and began tracing patterns in the dirt. "And sometimes I think about when I'm older and what I want to be. Daddy says I can be anything I want, but there are so many choices and I don't know how to pick just one." Rachel felt her chest tighten at the vulnerability in Sophie's voice. Here was this bright, beautiful child grappling with the same questions that Rachel herself had been avoiding, questions about worth, about purpose, about how to build a life that felt authentic rather than obligatory. "Can I tell you a secret?" Rachel said softly. "I'm 32 years old and I still don't know the answers to those questions." Sophie looked up, surprised. "But you're a grown-up. Grown-ups are supposed to know everything." "That's what we want kids to think," Rachel said with a small smile. But the truth is, we're all just figuring it out as we go. And sometimes we make choices that seem right at the time but turn out to be wrong. The important thing is being brave enough to admit when something isn't working and change course. Is that what you're doing? Sophie asked with that unnerving perceptiveness of hers. Changing course? I think so, Rachel admitted. I built this whole life that looked perfect from the outside. Big job, lots of money, people thinking I was successful. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask myself if I was happy. And when I finally did ask, the answer was no. Sophie nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Daddy says happiness is more important than fancy things. He says we don't have a lot of money, but we have each other, and that's worth more than anything. She paused, then added, but I still really want a puppy. Rachel laughed, surprised by the sudden shift from philosophy to practicality. Have you told your dad that? About 1,000,000 times, Sophie said. He says maybe when I'm older and can help take care of it, but I think he's worried about having enough money for dog food and vet bills and stuff. He doesn't say that, but I heard him talking to Aunt Marie once about budgets and making ends meet. Rachel looked over at Jack, who was examining something on a nearby tree trunk, giving them privacy for their conversation. She thought about his modest apartment, his old car, the secondhand furniture and hand-me-down clothes Sophie had mentioned wearing from her cousins. And yet there was more warmth and genuine contentment in that small space than in all of Rachel's expensive possessions combined. Your dad is doing an amazing job, Rachel said. I hope you know that. I do, Sophie said simply. He's the best daddy in the world. Then, with a child's innocent directness, she added, Do you have kids, Miss Morgan? No, Rachel said, feeling the familiar ache of that admission. I always thought I would someday, but I kept putting it off. First it was finishing school, then building my company, then there was always one more deal to close, one more goal to reach. And then I woke up one day and realized I was 32 and still waiting for the right time. Except maybe there is no right time. Maybe you just have to decide what matters most and make time for it. You could still have kids, Sophie pointed out. You're not that old. Mrs. Chen's daughter just had a baby, and she's like 40. Sophie, Jack called from where he'd been pretending not to listen. Let's not interrogate Ms. Morgan about her reproductive choices. I'm not interrogating, Sophie protested, though her grin suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. I'm just making conversation like you taught me. They spent another hour on the trail, with Sophie pointing out different plants and insects with the enthusiasm of a budding naturalist. Jack had clearly spent time teaching her about the local ecosystem, and Sophie proudly identified bird calls and explained the life cycle of butterflies with impressive accuracy. Rachel found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions and learning things she'd never considered important enough to know before. By the time they returned to the apartment, Rachel's phone, which she'd borrowed back from Jack, was buzzing with a series of increasingly urgent texts from Laura. She excused herself to the guest room to read them, her brief respite from reality coming to an abrupt end. The first message was straightforward. Found something, call me when you can. The subsequent messages were more alarming. Rachel, this is bigger than we thought. Andrew's been moving money. A lot of money. And finally, Richard is involved. So are 3 board members. I have proof. But we need to talk about what to do with it. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she dialed Laura's number. Her assistant answered immediately, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Rachel, where are you? Are you somewhere safe? I'm fine. I'm staying with... Rachel paused, realizing she'd never actually explained her situation to Laura. I'm with friends. What did you find? Laura took a deep breath. Okay, so I started digging into Andrew's financial transactions like you asked. At first, everything looked legitimate, expensive dinners with clients, consulting fees, travel expenses, but then I noticed a pattern. Every month for the last 18 months, Andrew has been processing payments to a consulting firm called KFAX Strategic Advisors. The amounts vary, but they total almost $8 million. $8 million? Rachel felt her stomach drop. For what services? That's the thing. The invoices are vague. Strategic consulting, market analysis, business development services. But when I dug deeper, I found that KFAX Strategic Advisors is a shell company. It was registered 18 months ago in Delaware, and the sole owner is... Laura paused for dramatic effect. Andrew's brother, Marcus K. Fax. Rachel closed her eyes, seeing the scope of the deception clearly now. He's been embezzling, funneling company money to himself through a fake consulting firm. It gets worse, Laura continued. I cross-referenced the timing of those payments with board meetings and major decisions. Every time there was a vote that went Andrew's way, approving his expanded authority, agreeing to the merger with Kfax Tech, overriding your objections about shelving the cancer detection software, there were payments made to accounts linked to the board members who voted in his favor. They're not direct payments, which would be obvious. They're structured as speaking fees, advisory payments, stock options in Kfax Tech, but the pattern is clear. He's been bribing board members, Rachel said flatly, using company money to buy votes and consolidate power. And there's more, Laura said grimly. The merger agreement between Morgan Technologies and Kfax Tech? I finally got someone in legal to show me the full terms. If the merger goes through and you're married to Andrew, he gains control of your voting shares in the combined company. But here's the kicker. If you die or are declared mentally incompetent within 5 years of the merger, all your shares transfer to him outright, no questions asked. Rachel felt cold spread through her limbs. He's been planning to get rid of me. I can't prove that, Laura said quickly. But Rachel, the pieces are all there. The financial manipulation, the isolation of you from trusted advisors, the public incident at the airport that he's now using to question your mental stability. This isn't just about money or power. This is about completely taking over everything you've built. Does Richard know about the embezzlement? Rachel asked, her mind racing through the implications. That's unclear. But he definitely knows about the merger terms because he helped negotiate them. And 3 of the payments I traced went to offshore accounts linked to companies Richard has investments in. So at minimum, he's been accepting financial benefits in exchange for supporting Andrew's agenda. Rachel sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of this information settle over her. Laura, if we expose this, it's going to destroy the company. The scandal alone, embezzlement, bribery, board corruption, our stock will tank. Investors will flee. Everything I've built could collapse. Maybe, Laura said. Or maybe you save what can be saved by cutting out the rot before it spreads further. Rachel, if Andrew succeeds, if that merger goes through and you're married to him, you lose everything anyway. At least this way you go down fighting for what's right. I need to think, Rachel said. Can you send me everything you found? All the documentation, the evidence, everything. Already done. Check your personal email. But Rachel, you need to decide quickly. The board meeting is Monday morning, and if you're not there to defend yourself, Andrew is going to paint you as unstable and push through a vote to remove you as CEO. Once that happens, you'll have no authority to stop the merger or expose what he's been doing. After ending the call, Rachel sat in silence, staring at the wall of the guest room without really seeing it. She'd known Andrew was ambitious, knew he was manipulative, but she'd underestimated the scope of his betrayal. He hadn't just been taking advantage of their relationship. He'd been systematically dismantling everything she'd built, positioning himself to take it all while destroying her credibility in the process. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Rachel? Jack's voice was gentle. Sophie wants to know if you'll watch a movie with us. But if you need space, I can tell her you're not feeling well. Rachel stood and opened the door, finding Jack standing there with concern etched across his features. He took one look at her face, and his expression shifted to something more serious. Bad news? He asked quietly. The worst, Rachel confirmed. Everything I suspected about Andrew, everything I feared, it's true. And it's worse than I imagined. She felt her voice crack slightly. He's been stealing from the company, bribing board members, setting up a merger that would give him complete control while pushing me out. And if I fight back, I might destroy everything I've spent my entire adult life building. Jack studied her for a long moment, then stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, giving them privacy from Sophie's curious ears. Okay, so let's think this through logically. What are your options? I don't know, Rachel admitted, sinking back onto the bed. I could go public with everything, file charges, expose the embezzlement, blow up the merger, but the scandal would devastate the company. We'd lose investor confidence, our stock would crash, and thousands of employees would suffer because of decisions made by a handful of corrupt people. What's the alternative? Jack asked. Let it happen. Let Andrew take over, walk away with whatever settlement I can negotiate, and try to rebuild somewhere else. At least that way the company survives, even if I'm not part of it anymore. And you'd be okay with that? Jack's tone suggested he already knew the answer. No, Rachel said miserably. I wouldn't, because it's not just about me or my ego. It's about the cancer detection software we developed. Technology that could save millions of lives, but that Andrew wants to shelve because it's not immediately profitable. It's about the employees who believed in our mission and deserve better than to work for someone who's been embezzling from them. It's about principle. Jack sat down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. You know what I learned in the military? Sometimes there are no good options. Sometimes you're choosing between bad and worse. But what separates leaders from followers is being willing to make the hard call and live with the consequences. What would you do? Rachel asked. If you were in my position? I'd ask myself what I could live with, Jack said simply. Could you live with yourself if you walked away and let Andrew win? If you let him bury technology that could save lives just to protect the comfortable fiction that everything's fine? Or would that eat at you every day for the rest of your life? Rachel knew the answer before he'd finished the question. I couldn't live with that. I'd always wonder what would have happened if I'd fought back. I'd always feel like I'd chosen convenience over courage. Then you already know what you need to do, Jack said. The question isn't whether to fight. It's how to fight smart. What do you mean? You're thinking like this is all or nothing. Either expose everything and watch the company burn, or stay silent and let Andrew win. But maybe there's a middle path. What if you went to the board privately first? Before the Monday meeting, before Andrew has a chance to control the narrative. You present them with the evidence of embezzlement and bribery. Give them a chance to do the right thing. And if they don't, Rachel asked, if they're all so compromised that they choose to cover it up, then you go public with everything, but at least you gave them the chance to save themselves. And more importantly, you'll know exactly who you can trust and who's complicit. Right now, you're assuming the entire board is corrupt. But what if some of them don't know what Andrew's been doing? What if there are people who would stand with you if they knew the truth? Rachel considered this, feeling the first stirrings of something that might be hope. There are a few board members who've been with the company since the beginning. They knew my mother before she died. They helped me build Morgan Technologies from a startup into what it is today. I can't believe they'd knowingly participate in this kind of corruption. Then start there, Jack suggested. Reach out to the ones you trust. Present the evidence. Build a coalition before Monday's meeting. Don't walk in alone and vulnerable. Walk in with allies and a strategy. That's actually brilliant, Rachel said slowly, her mind already working through the logistics. If I can get even 3 or 4 board members on my side before the meeting, Andrew won't have the votes to remove me as CEO. And if I expose the embezzlement and bribery publicly at the meeting, with board support, it becomes about cleaning house rather than burning everything down. Exactly, Jack said. You control the narrative instead of reacting to his. You position yourself as the leader who uncovered corruption and took decisive action, rather than the unstable CEO who's having a breakdown. Rachel looked at him with new appreciation. You're pretty good at strategy for a medic. I spent 10 years patching up Marines who got into stupid situations because of bad planning, Jack said with a slight smile. You learn to think ahead or you end up making things worse. Plus, Sophie's 8. You should see the level of strategic negotiation required to get her to eat vegetables and finish her homework without 3 hours of drama. Despite everything, Rachel laughed. I'm sure that's excellent preparation for corporate warfare. You'd be surprised, Jack said. Both involve stubborn people who think they know better than you, emotional manipulation, and the careful deployment of rewards and consequences. He stood, offering her his hand. Come on. Sophie's waiting, and she picked a movie about a princess who saves herself instead of waiting for a prince. Seems appropriate, don't you think? Rachel took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, how warm his hand felt in hers, how his steady presence made her feel capable of facing whatever came next. She'd only known this man for 2 days, but already he'd given her more genuine support and clear-headed advice than anyone in her professional circle had provided in years. Thank you, she said softly. for everything. For taking me in, for listening, for helping me think clearly. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in at that airport." "You would have figured it out," Jack said with quiet confidence. "Strong people don't need saving. They just need someone to remind them of their own strength when they've temporarily forgotten." They joined Sophie in the living room, where the 8-year-old had constructed an elaborate nest of blankets and pillows on the couch. She'd also raided the kitchen for snacks, creating a spread that would have made any movie theater jealous. "You're sitting between me and Daddy," Sophie announced, patting the middle cushion, "because that's the best spot, and you're our special guest." Rachel settled into the designated spot, finding herself flanked by Sophie's enthusiastic narration on one side and Jack's quiet, steady presence on the other. The movie was indeed about a princess who solved her own problems through wit and courage rather than waiting for rescue, a message that felt almost too on the nose given Rachel's current situation. Halfway through the film, Sophie fell asleep with her head on Rachel's good shoulder, her small hand still clutching a half-eaten cookie. Jack gently removed the cookie and covered his daughter with a blanket, then caught Rachel's eye and smiled. "She really likes you," he whispered. "She doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly." "I really like her too," Rachel whispered back, surprised by how much she meant it. "She's special, Jack. You're raising an incredible kid." "I'm trying," he said softly. "Some days I'm convinced I'm screwing it up completely. Other days, I think maybe we're doing okay." "You're doing more than okay," Rachel assured him. "She's happy, confident, kind, curious about the world. Those aren't accidents. They're the result of good parenting." They fell into comfortable silence, watching the rest of the movie while Sophie slept peacefully between them. When the credits rolled, Jack carefully lifted his daughter and carried her to bed, leaving Rachel alone in the living room with her thoughts. She pulled out the borrowed phone and began drafting emails to the board members she thought she could trust. Carefully worded messages requesting urgent private meetings before Monday's scheduled board session. She kept the tone professional but conveyed the seriousness of the situation without revealing specific details that could be forwarded to Andrew. By the time Jack returned from putting Sophie to bed, Rachel had sent 5 emails and was working on a 6th. He settled into the armchair across from her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Thought you could use this," he said, offering her one of the glasses. "Unless the pain meds say no alcohol." "I stopped taking those this morning," Rachel said, accepting the wine gratefully. "Figured I needed a clear head more than I needed pain relief." She took a sip and nearly moaned at the taste. "This is really good wine." "Don't sound so surprised," Jack said with mock offense. "Just because I live in a modest apartment doesn't mean I don't have taste. That's from a small vineyard in Napa. I bought a case when Sophie and I took a road trip up the coast last summer, one of the few luxuries I allow myself." "I'm sorry," Rachel said, genuinely embarrassed. "I didn't mean to imply—" "I know," Jack interrupted gently. "I'm just giving you a hard time. But it's a good reminder that you've been operating in a world where money equals value and luxury equals quality. Sometimes the best things are the ones people choose carefully because they can't afford to waste money on things that don't matter." Rachel studied him over the rim of her wine glass. "Is that a dig at my lifestyle?" "It's an observation," Jack said. "Not a judgment. But yeah, I've noticed that you seem surprised by basic things. Good coffee, home-cooked meals, a comfortable bed. Like you've forgotten that money can't actually buy the things that make life worth living." "You're right," Rachel admitted. "I have forgotten. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring everything by financial metrics. Success meant profits. Value meant market share. Happiness meant—" She stopped, realizing she couldn't finish that sentence. "I don't think I've thought about happiness as a goal in years. It was always just a side effect that would supposedly come once I'd achieved enough other goals." "And did it?" Jack asked. "Did happiness show up once you'd achieved enough?" "No," Rachel said quietly. "It didn't. I just kept moving the goalposts, telling myself that the next promotion, the next funding round, the next product launch would be the thing that finally made me feel satisfied. But it never was. And eventually, I stopped expecting it to be. I just accepted that my life was about achievement, not fulfillment." "That sounds exhausting," Jack observed. "It was," Rachel agreed. "It is. But I didn't know how to stop. When your entire identity is built around being successful, taking your foot off the gas feels like admitting defeat, like saying you're not good enough, strong enough, dedicated enough. Jack was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass thoughtfully. Can I tell you something? When I first got out of the military, I was angry all the time. Angry at Sophie's mom for leaving, angry at the Navy for not being able to accommodate my new situation as a single parent, angry at myself for not being able to keep my marriage together. And I channeled all that anger into being the perfect father, making all Sophie's meals from scratch, keeping the apartment spotless, signing her up for every enrichment activity I could afford. What changed? Rachel asked. Sophie did, Jack said with a small smile. One day, she was about 5 and she asked me why I was always so tired and grumpy. And I gave her some BS answer about work stress. And she said, "But Daddy, you're always stressed, even when we're supposed to be having fun." And I realized she was right. I'd been so focused on being the perfect parent that I'd forgotten to actually enjoy being her parent. I was performing fatherhood instead of living it. So what did you do? I let go of perfect, Jack said simply. Started making easier meals sometimes. Let the apartment be a little messy, cut back on activities so we had more free time to just hang out together. And you know what? Sophie didn't suffer from having a less perfect parent. She thrived from having a more present one. Turns out kids don't need perfection. They need presence. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes again. I think I needed to hear that. I've spent so long trying to be perfect. The perfect CEO, the perfect fiancé, the perfect public figure. But I've never just tried to be present in my own life, to actually experience it instead of constantly optimizing it. It's not too late to start, Jack said. But fair warning, being present is harder than being perfect. Being perfect is just following rules. Being present requires being vulnerable, making choices based on what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. That's scary stuff. Everything about my life is scary right now, Rachel admitted. My career is in crisis. My relationship is over. I'm about to wage war against people who have the power to destroy everything I've built. But somehow, sitting here with you and Sophie, drinking wine and talking about life, this feels like the least scary thing I've done in years. That's because you're finally letting yourself be human, Jack said. You're allowing yourself to need help, to be uncertain, to just exist without having to prove anything to anyone. That's not weakness, Rachel. That's courage. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily from heavy topics to lighter ones and back again. Jack told her stories from his Navy days, the absurd situations Marines got themselves into, the moments of unexpected beauty in war zones, the friends he'd lost and the ones who'd saved his life in more ways than one. Rachel found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her complicated relationship with her late mother, who'd been brilliant and demanding and impossible to please, her secret dream of doing medical research before business had taken over her life, her fear that she'd wasted her youth chasing achievements that ultimately meant nothing. You're only 32, Jack pointed out. You keep talking like your life is over, like you've missed all your chances. But you've got decades ahead of you. You can pivot, start over, build something new. The question is whether you're brave enough to do it. I don't feel very brave right now, Rachel confessed. Brave people never do, Jack said. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. And from where I'm sitting, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You're about to walk into a boardroom and face down people who've betrayed you, knowing it might cost you everything. That takes serious guts. Or serious stupidity, Rachel said with a rueful laugh. Sometimes there's not much difference between the two, Jack acknowledged, but you'll figure it out. And whatever happens, you'll land on your feet. People with your intelligence and determination always do. When Rachel finally retreated to the guest room well past midnight, her mind was clearer than it had been in days. She spent another hour reviewing the documentation Laura had sent, making notes and building her case. The evidence was damning, clear patterns of embezzlement, financial ties between Andrew and board members, email trails that revealed the coordination of their efforts to marginalize her authority. But beyond the specifics of corporate corruption, Rachel found herself thinking about the broader question Jack had raised. Who did she want to be if not CEO of Morgan Technologies? What did she actually value beyond professional achievement? What would bring her the kind of contentment she'd witnessed in Jack's modest life? The answers didn't come easily, but pieces were beginning to form. She thought about the cancer detection software and how proud she'd been when her team first developed it, not because of its profit potential, but because of the lives it could save. She thought about the early days of Morgan Technologies, when it had been her and a handful of passionate engineers working out of a converted warehouse, united by the belief that technology could solve real problems for real people. Somewhere along the line, that mission had gotten lost beneath quarterly earnings reports and investor presentations, and the relentless pressure to grow faster, scale bigger, dominate markets. The company had become an end unto itself rather than a means to a greater purpose. And Rachel had let that happen because she'd been too busy proving herself to question whether what she was building still aligned with what she actually believed. Sunday morning arrived with church bells from a nearby parish and the smell of coffee brewing. Rachel emerged from the guest room to find Jack already up and working at the small kitchen table, his laptop open and papers spread around him. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Rachel admitted. "Too much to think about." "Join the club," Jack said, gesturing to his own work. "I'm trying to finish a certification requirement for work before tomorrow. Nothing like waiting until the last minute." Rachel poured herself coffee and sat across from him, appreciating the companionable silence as they each focused on their respective tasks. It felt oddly domestic, this shared space and mutual productivity, and Rachel found herself imagining what it would be like to have this as a regular part of her life. Mornings spent with someone who demanded nothing from her except occasional conversation and respect for their shared space. Sophie wandered out around 8, still in her pajamas and dragging Mr. Hopscotch behind her. She climbed into her father's lap without a word, clearly not yet fully awake, and Jack automatically adjusted his position to accommodate her while continuing to type one-handed. "Morning, baby girl," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Is it pancake day?" Sophie mumbled. "It can be if you want it to be," Jack said, "but you have to actually wake up enough to help me make them." 5 more minutes, Sophie negotiated, burrowing deeper into her father's chest. Rachel watched this exchange with a mixture of tenderness and envy. There was such easy affection between them, such uncomplicated love. No games, no manipulation, no performance, just a father and daughter who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Eventually, Sophie roused herself enough to participate in pancake production, and the three of them fell into the now familiar rhythm of breakfast together. Afterward, Rachel borrowed Jack's laptop to finalize her presentation for the board members she'd contacted. 3 had already responded, agreeing to meet with her privately on Sunday evening before Monday's scheduled board meeting. 2 others hadn't responded, which Rachel interpreted as either fear or complicity. "I need to go into the city tonight," Rachel told Jack as they cleaned up from breakfast. "I have meetings scheduled with board members, and I should probably find a hotel, get my own space to prepare for tomorrow." She saw something flicker across Jack's face, disappointment maybe, or concern, but he nodded easily. "Of course. Want me to drive you? The train's running on a reduced Sunday schedule." "You don't have to do that," Rachel protested. "You've already done so much." "I want to," Jack said simply. "Besides, Sophie's been begging to go to the Museum of Natural History, and it's right near where you'll be meeting. We can make a day of it, drop you at your meetings, and pick you up afterward if you want." The offer was casual, but Rachel heard the underlying message. He wasn't abandoning her to face this alone. Even though their time together was coming to an end, even though she was about to return to her real life, he was making sure she knew she had support. "That would be wonderful," Rachel said, her voice slightly thick with emotion. "Thank you." The drive into Manhattan was filled with Sophie's chatter about dinosaurs and space exhibits, her excitement about the museum visit bubbling over in a steady stream of questions and observations. Rachel found herself drawn into the conversation, genuinely interested in Sophie's theories about what happened to the dinosaurs and her dreams of becoming an astronaut. "Do you think there are other planets with people on them?" Sophie asked from the back seat. "Because the universe is really, really big, so it seems like there should be other people somewhere. But also, we're pretty special here on Earth, so maybe we're the only ones." "I think the universe is big enough for both to be true," Rachel said, turning to look at Sophie. "We can be special and unique while still being part of something larger. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." "That's a good answer," Sophie declared. Daddy, did you hear Miss Morgan's answer? That's philosophy. I heard, Jack said, catching Rachel's eye in the rearview mirror with a smile. Ms. Morgan is pretty smart. They dropped Rachel at a small boutique hotel in Midtown where she'd booked a room for the night. Jack helped her with her minimal luggage, just the clothes she'd arrived in and borrowed items from Jack that she'd need to return, and hesitated in the lobby as if wanting to say something but unsure how. We'll be at the museum until about 5, he said finally. Call me when your meetings are done, and we can grab dinner before heading back. Unless you need to stay in the city tonight? No, Rachel said. I want to come back. To your place, if that's okay. One more night before I have to face everything tomorrow. Of course it's okay, Jack said. That's your room for as long as you need it. Sophie threw her arms around Rachel's waist in an enthusiastic hug. Good luck with your meetings. Remember what Daddy always tells me before tests? You're smart, you're capable, and you've got this. Rachel hugged her back, breathing in the little girl's strawberry shampoo and feeling her heart contract with unexpected affection. Thank you, Sophie. That's excellent advice. After they left, Rachel stood in the hotel lobby for a moment, gathering herself. She'd changed into clothes more appropriate for business meetings, a spare outfit Laura had dropped off earlier, along with Rachel's laptop and some essential documents. Looking at her reflection in the lobby mirror, Rachel barely recognized herself. She looked tired, yes, but also somehow more alive than she had in years. Less polished, perhaps, but more real. Her meetings were scheduled at a private dining room in an upscale restaurant, neutral territory that wouldn't raise suspicions if anyone happened to notice board members gathering. Rachel arrived early, ordering coffee and reviewing her notes one final time. She'd printed out the most damning evidence, financial records showing the embezzlement, email chains revealing coordination between Andrew and compromised board members, analysis of the merger terms that made clear how extensively she'd been deceived. The first to arrive was Margaret Chen, one of the company's founding board members and her mother's closest friend. Margaret was in her mid-60s, sharp as ever despite her age, with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades in tech, when it was even more male-dominated than it was now. Rachel, Margaret said, embracing her warmly before pulling back to study her face. My God, child, what happened? I've been hearing rumors all weekend, but no one seems to know what's true and what's speculation. It's complicated, Rachel said. But I'm glad you came. I need to show you something, and I need you to keep an open mind. Over the next hour, as other trusted board members arrived, James Peterson, a venture capitalist who'd been an early investor, Susan Rodriguez, who joined the board 2 years ago and had consistently pushed for ethical business practices, and David Kim, the oldest serving board member and a legendary figure in Silicon Valley, Rachel laid out everything she'd discovered. She watched their faces as she revealed the extent of Andrew's embezzlement, the bribery of board members, the manipulation of corporate decisions. Margaret's expression shifted from shock to fury. James looked physically ill. Susan kept shaking her head in disbelief. David remained stone-faced, his legendary poker face in full effect. How long have you known about this? Margaret asked when Rachel finished her presentation. I started suspecting something was wrong months ago, Rachel admitted, but I didn't have proof until this week. And I wanted to bring this to you first before tomorrow's board meeting because I believe you're the members who weren't compromised. I believe you can help me fix this before it destroys everything we've built. Who else knows? James asked. My attorney, my assistant who helped gather this evidence, and the 4 of you. That's it. Andrew doesn't know I've discovered his embezzlement. Richard doesn't know I've traced the payments to compromised board members. As far as they know, I'm still the unstable CEO who had a breakdown at an airport. About that, Susan interjected. What actually happened at Newark? The official story being circulated is that you became violent with Andrew during a business disagreement. Rachel touched her still-healing shoulder reflexively. Andrew assaulted me in public. He'd been increasingly controlling and aggressive, and when I tried to end our engagement, he grabbed my injured shoulder and wouldn't let go. A bystander intervened, security was called, and witnesses corroborated that Andrew was the aggressor. I can provide you with the police report, witness statements, and security footage if needed. Jesus Christ, Margaret breathed. Rachel, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ask for help? Because I was ashamed, Rachel admitted. Because I thought I could handle it myself. because I'd spent so long being the strong, unflappable CEO that admitting I was in an abusive relationship felt like admitting weakness, and because I didn't know who I could trust. Andrew had been working on the board for months, painting me as difficult and temperamental, setting up this narrative that I was the problem. David Kim spoke for the first time, his voice measured and thoughtful. I've been in this industry for 40 years. I've seen brilliant founders destroyed by partners they trusted. I've watched companies torn apart by greed and ego. But this, he gestured to the evidence spread across the table, this is one of the most sophisticated schemes I've encountered. Andrew didn't just embezzle money. He built a comprehensive strategy to take over your company while making you look like the unstable party. That takes planning, patience, and a level of sociopathy that's genuinely disturbing. The question is what we do about it, Rachel said. I can go public with all of this tomorrow at the board meeting, but that creates a massive scandal that could tank the company's stock and destroy investor confidence. Or we can handle this more quietly, force Andrew's resignation, buy out the compromised board members, and restructure without the public drama. But that requires all of you to stand with me. There's a third option, Margaret said slowly. We could use tomorrow's meeting as Andrew's trap instead of yours. Let him make his move to remove you as CEO, let the compromised board members vote in his favor, and then you reveal everything, not just to the board but with law enforcement present. We turn the board meeting into an intervention, catch them all in the act, and let the legal system handle it. That's incredibly risky, James pointed out. If even one of them catches wind of what we're planning, they'll lawyer up and we'll lose the element of surprise. But it's also the cleanest solution, Susan argued. If we try to handle this quietly, Andrew and his allies can claim they're being railroaded. They can sue, fight back, drag things out in courts for years. But if we catch them in the act of trying to execute their coup with clear evidence of the crimes they've committed, that's much harder to defend against. They debated strategy for another 2 hours, weighing options and planning contingencies. Rachel found herself energized by the discussion, reminded of why she'd loved building this company in the first place. The collaboration with smart, principled people working toward a common goal. This was what leadership should feel like, not the isolation and paranoia she'd been experiencing lately. By the time they adjourned, they had a plan. Margaret would contact law enforcement tonight, briefing them on the evidence and requesting their presence at tomorrow's board meeting. James would reach out to the company's attorneys, not the ones Andrew had been working with, but outside counsel who could provide unbiased advice. Susan would prepare a statement for investors explaining the situation once news broke. And David would make calls to major shareholders, ensuring they understood that the board was taking decisive action to protect the company's integrity. Rachel's role was simple. Show up tomorrow, let Andrew make his move, and then present the evidence that would end his scheme permanently. One more thing, Margaret said as they were leaving. After this is over, we need to talk about whether you still want to be CEO. Rachel blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? I mean that you've been through hell, Rachel. Andrew's betrayal, the assault, the stress of discovering this corruption, that takes a toll. And the company is going to need strong, focused leadership to get through the aftermath of this scandal. If you need time to recover, if you need to step back for your own well-being, we'll support that. We can bring in an interim CEO while you take a leave of absence. I appreciate that, Rachel said carefully. But I need to see this through. I need to be the one who stands up tomorrow and says we're better than the people who tried to corrupt us. After that, she paused, thinking about conversations with Jack, about Sophie's innocent questions, about pancakes and hiking trails, and the possibility of a life that wasn't consumed by corporate warfare. After that, we'll see. Margaret studied her with knowing eyes. You've changed this weekend. I can see it. Whatever happened after you left that airport, whoever you've been spending time with, it's given you perspective. And honestly, I think that's going to make you a better leader, whether you stay CEO or choose a different path. Rachel called Jack from outside the restaurant, suddenly desperate to hear his voice. He answered on the second ring, Sophie's excited chatter audible in the background. How'd it go? He asked. Better than I hoped, Rachel said. I've got allies. We've got a plan. Tomorrow's going to be intense, but I think we can pull this off. Of course you can, Jack said with easy confidence. You're brilliant, you're prepared, and you're fighting for something that matters. That's a winning combination. Where are you guys? Just leaving the planetarium show. Sophie's convinced we need to buy a telescope that can see other galaxies, and I'm trying to explain that such telescopes cost more than our car. It's going well." Rachel laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. "I'm done here. Can you meet me somewhere for dinner?" "Already made reservations at Sophie's favorite pizza place," Jack said. "Text me your hotel address and we'll pick you up in 20 minutes. Dinner was exactly what Rachel needed. A noisy, casual pizza restaurant full of families and laughter, where no one cared that she was a billionaire CEO in crisis. Sophie regaled them with every detail of the museum visit, demonstrating her newfound knowledge about dinosaurs with enthusiastic hand gestures and sound effects. Jack listened with patient attention, asking questions and offering gentle corrections when Sophie's facts got a bit creative. Rachel found herself watching them with a bittersweet ache in her chest. This was what she'd been missing. Not just family, but ease. The comfort of people who knew each other so well they could communicate in shorthand, who could find joy in simple things like pizza and museum visits, who didn't need expensive restaurants or exclusive experiences to feel satisfied. On the drive back to Jack's apartment, Sophie fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day's adventures. Jack drove with one hand, the other resting on the gear shift, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. "Thank you for today," Rachel said quietly, not wanting to wake Sophie. "For everything, really. You didn't have to include me in your plans, didn't have to make me feel like part of your family, but you did, and it means more than I can express." "Sophie wanted you there," Jack said simply. "And so did I." There was weight behind those last words, something unspoken but significant. Rachel felt it settle between them, the acknowledgement of whatever this was developing into, this connection that had formed over just a few days but felt substantial in a way that defied logic. "Jack," Rachel started, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say, not sure if she should say anything at all. "I know," he said softly, keeping his eyes on the road. "Wrong timing, wrong circumstances, wrong everything. You're about to walk into a corporate battle that's going to consume all your energy, and I've got Sophie to think about. I can't drag her into something complicated or uncertain." "But," Rachel prompted, hearing the unspoken caveat, "but I want you to know that this weekend hasn't been charity or obligation for me," Jack said. "I've genuinely enjoyed having you in our space. You fit there in a way I wasn't expecting. And when all this is over, when your life settles down and you figure out what comes next, I'd like to see you again. Not as the person helping you through a crisis, but just as someone who wants to spend time with you." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "I'd like that too, very much." "Good," Jack said, finally glancing over at her with a smile. "Then we'll call it a plan. You go win your war tomorrow, save your company or burn it down or whatever needs to happen. And then when the dust settles, we'll figure out what this is between us." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly, and Sophie snoring gently in the back seat. Rachel stared out the window at the suburbs rolling past and tried to imagine a future beyond tomorrow's board meeting. For the first time in years, she could picture something other than endless work and climbing corporate ladders. She could picture Saturday morning pancakes and hiking trails and telescope lessons. She could picture belonging somewhere, not because of what she accomplished, but simply because of who she was. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. And for tonight, it was enough. Back at the apartment, Jack carried Sophie to bed while Rachel retreated to the guest room to make final preparations for tomorrow. She laid out her outfit, a power suit that Laura had brought, armor for the battle ahead. She reviewed her notes, practiced her presentation, visualized how tomorrow's meeting would unfold. She was as prepared as she could be, but the anxiety still hummed beneath her skin. A soft knock at her door came close to midnight. Rachel opened it to find Jack standing there with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "Thought you might need help settling your mind," he said. "This stuff usually helps Sophie when she's anxious about something." They sat on the bed, backs against the headboard, sipping tea in companionable silence. Rachel found herself studying the calluses on Jack's hands, evidence of hard work and practical skills, so different from the soft hands of executives who'd never done manual labor. "Are you scared about tomorrow?" Jack asked after a while. "Terrified," Rachel admitted. "What if I'm wrong? What if the evidence isn't as damning as I think? What if Andrew has some explanation that makes me look paranoid and vindictive? Then you adapt, Jack said. But Rachel, you're not wrong. You have documentation, witnesses, financial records. You have truth on your side. Trust in that. When did you become so wise? Rachel asked with a slight smile. Single parenthood is basically a crash course in wisdom and humility, Jack replied. You learn pretty quickly that you can't control everything, that sometimes things fall apart despite your best efforts, and that the only thing you can control is how you respond to circumstances. It's liberating, actually, once you accept it. Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder without thinking, and Jack stiffened for only a moment before relaxing, his arm coming around to hold her gently. They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, just drawing comfort from proximity and shared warmth. Whatever happens tomorrow, Rachel said eventually, I want you to know that meeting you changed something for me. You reminded me that there are different ways to be successful, different ways to build a life, and I'm grateful for that. You're welcome, Jack said simply. But Rachel, you already knew that. You've just been too busy to remember it. All I did was provide a quiet space where you could rediscover things you'd temporarily forgotten. Eventually, Rachel pulled away, knowing that if she stayed much longer, she'd do something impulsive that neither of them was ready for. Jack seemed to understand, standing and collecting the empty mugs. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that boardroom and show everyone exactly who Rachel Morgan is. Not the CEO they've been trying to control, but the leader who built something worth protecting. And they won't know what hit them. After he left, Rachel lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios for the 100th time. She thought about Andrew's face when she revealed his embezzlement, about Richard's reaction when the compromised board members were exposed, about the satisfaction of watching their carefully constructed house of cards collapse. But she also thought about what came after, about the choice Margaret had raised. Did she still want to be CEO? Did she want to rebuild Morgan Technologies in the aftermath of this scandal? Or was this her opportunity to step away and build something new? She didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in her life, Rachel felt like she had the courage to ask the questions and face whatever answers she found. Tomorrow would bring battle. But tonight, in a small guest room with lavender-scented sheets and a handmade quilt, surrounded by the sounds of Jack checking locks and turning off lights, Rachel Morgan felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt ready. Rachel woke at dawn to the sound of rain tapping against the window, a gentle percussion that matched the nervous rhythm of her heartbeat. She lay still for a moment, gathering her thoughts and her courage, knowing that today would either vindicate everything she'd built or destroy it completely. There was no middle ground, no comfortable compromise waiting at the end of this particular road. She found Jack already awake in the kitchen, moving quietly so as not to disturb Sophie. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression told her he'd been awake for a while, probably worrying on her behalf in that quiet way he had. Couldn't sleep either? Rachel asked, accepting the coffee he handed her without her having to ask. Old habits, Jack said. Military trained me to wake up at 0500 regardless of what time I went to bed. These days I use it as my quiet time. Read, catch up on news, think through things without an 8-year-old asking me why the sky is blue or whether dinosaurs could have learned to use tools if they'd had more time. Despite her anxiety, Rachel smiled. Does she really ask you that? Last Tuesday, Jack confirmed, followed by a 20-minute discourse on what kind of tools a T-Rex could use given their short arms. She'd clearly been thinking about it for days. I had to pull up YouTube videos about their anatomy to properly address her concerns. You're a good dad, Rachel said, not for the first time. I'm a dad who tries, Jack corrected gently. There's a difference. Some days I nail it, some days I'm convinced I'm screwing her up for life. Today's jury is still out. I let her have cookies for breakfast last Tuesday because I was too tired to argue about nutrition. The fact that you worry about it means you're doing better than you think, Rachel said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. Bad parents don't worry about whether they're doing it right. Jack joined her with his own coffee, and they sat in the pre-dawn quiet, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of the city waking up. Rachel found herself memorizing this moment, the warmth of the cup in her hands, the comfortable silence, the sense of being exactly where she needed to be before walking into battle. What time do you need to leave? Jack asked eventually. The board meeting is at 9, but I want to be there early. 7:30 maybe? Give myself time to set up, make sure everything's in place. Rachel paused, then added, You don't have to drive me. I can call a car service. I'm driving you, Jack said in a tone that brooked no argument. Sophie and I will drop you off, and we'll be nearby when it's over. However it goes, you are not facing the aftermath alone. Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. You barely know me. Why are you doing all this? Jack was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You remember how I told you about my mom, the one who left me at a hospital when I was 2 days old? For years I was angry at her. Couldn't understand how someone could just abandon their kid like that. But as I got older, especially after Sophie's mom left, I started thinking about it differently. Maybe my mom was in trouble. Maybe she was desperate, scared, saw no other way out. And maybe if just one person had stepped up and helped her, given her a reason to believe things could be different, my whole life would have been different. He met Rachel's eyes across the table. I can't change my past. Can't help my mom retroactively. But I can be the person who steps up when someone else needs it. And maybe that sounds naive or overly idealistic, but I have to believe that kindness matters. That helping one person can ripple outward in ways we can't predict. You're not just some random stranger to me anymore, Rachel. You're someone who sat on my couch and made my daughter laugh. You're someone who chopped vegetables in my kitchen and told me about dreams you'd forgotten you had. So yeah, I'm driving you to your board meeting, and I'm going to be there afterward, because that's what you do for people you care about. Rachel had to look away, blinking back tears. I care about you too, she said quietly. Both of you. More than I expected to in such a short time. Then let's get you through today, Jack said, his tone becoming more practical. After that, we'll have time to figure out what this is and where it goes. But first, you need to win your war. Sophie emerged around 6:30, still in her pajamas and rubbing sleep from her eyes. She padded over to her father and climbed into his lap with the ease of long practice, and Jack wrapped his arms around her without interrupting his conversation with Rachel about logistics and timing. Is today the big important day? Sophie asked, her voice still fuzzy with sleep. Yes, baby girl, Jack confirmed. Miss Morgan has a very important meeting today. Sophie turned to look at Rachel with solemn eyes. Are you going to fight the bad people? Rachel was taken aback by the bluntness of the question, but Jack didn't intervene, waiting to see how she'd respond. Something like that, Rachel said carefully. I'm going to tell the truth about some people who've been doing bad things. And hopefully the other people at my company will listen and help me fix it. Will the bad people be mad at you? Sophie asked. Probably, Rachel admitted. They won't like being caught. Sophie nodded as if this made perfect sense. When Tommy Martinez was cheating on spelling tests and I told Mrs. Patterson, he was really mad at me. He said I was a tattletale and that nobody would want to be my friend. But Mrs. Patterson said telling the truth isn't tattling when someone's doing something wrong. And then Tommy had to apologize, and now we're friends again. Maybe your bad people will apologize too. Maybe, Rachel said, though she doubted Andrew was capable of the kind of genuine remorse that led to real apologies. But even if they don't, telling the truth is still the right thing to do. That's what Daddy always says, Sophie agreed. He says doing the right thing is hard sometimes, but you feel better afterward because you know you were brave. Your daddy is a very smart man, Rachel said, meeting Jack's eyes and seeing the warmth there. By 7 o'clock, Rachel was dressed in her power suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, paired with a white blouse and heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked every inch the CEO, polished and professional and formidable. But when she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror, she saw something else, too. A steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there a week ago, a sense of purpose that went deeper than professional ambition. Jack whistled low when she emerged from the guest room. Remind me never to get on your bad side. You look like you could dismantle a company with a single glance. That's the idea, Rachel said, but she was smiling. Armor for battle. Daddy, why does Miss Morgan need armor? Sophie asked, looking confused. I thought she was just going to a meeting. It's a metaphor, sweetheart, Jack explained. Sometimes we dress a certain way to feel stronger and braver. Like when you wear your Wonder Woman t-shirt on days when school feels hard. Oh, Sophie's face lit with understanding. So Ms. Morgan's suit is like my Wonder Woman shirt. That makes sense. You look very powerful, Ms. Morgan. The bad people are going to be scared of you. From your mouth to God's ears, Rachel murmured, then caught herself. Sorry, that's something my mother used to say. My mom used to say things too, Sophie offered. I don't remember most of them, but sometimes Daddy tells me stories about the things she said. It helps me remember her a little bit. The drive into the city was quiet, with Sophie dozing in the back seat and Jack navigating through increasingly heavy traffic as they approached Manhattan. Rachel stared out the window, running through her presentation one more time in her mind, anticipating objections and preparing responses. She'd faced hostile investors before, had navigated difficult board meetings and contentious negotiations, but this felt different, more personal, higher stakes, with the added weight of knowing that some of the people in that room had actively betrayed her. You're tensing up, Jack observed, glancing over at her. I can see it in your shoulders. Take a breath. You've got this. Rachel forced herself to inhale deeply, then exhale slowly. What if I freeze? What if I get in there and can't find the words? Then you look down at your notes, take another breath, and start talking, Jack said calmly. You're not performing brain surgery, Rachel. You're presenting facts to people who need to hear them. The truth doesn't require perfect delivery. It just requires honesty and courage, both of which you have in abundance. They arrived at Morgan Technologies headquarters at 7:45. The building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the financial district, 42 stories of ambition and achievement. Rachel had been so proud when they'd moved into this space 5 years ago, seeing it as validation of everything she'd built. Now, looking up at it from the street, she felt a strange detachment, as if she were seeing it for the first time and questioning whether all this glass and steel was worth what she'd sacrificed to obtain it. Impressive, Jack said, following her gaze. You built that? I built what's inside it, Rachel corrected. The technology, the team, the mission. The building is just a shell. I'm starting to realize that maybe I've been confusing the shell for the substance. Jack squeezed her hand briefly. Then today, you remind everyone what the substance actually is. Go show them who Rachel Morgan really is. Not the figurehead they've been trying to control, but the leader who built something worth fighting for. Rachel leaned over and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, surprising both of them. Thank you for everything. I'll text you when it's over. Chat. She climbed out of the car before she could second-guess the impulse, before she could see Jack's reaction or let herself think too hard about what that gesture meant. Behind her, she heard Sophie's sleepy voice asking, Daddy, did Ms. Morgan just kiss you? But she didn't wait to hear Jack's response. The lobby of Morgan Technologies was already bustling with early arriving employees, most of whom did double takes when they recognized their CEO. Rachel had been conspicuously absent for nearly a week, and the rumor mill had clearly been working overtime. She could see speculation in people's eyes, hear whispers starting up in her wake as she crossed to the executive elevators. Laura was waiting by the elevator bank, looking stressed and exhausted. Thank God you're here, she said, falling into step beside Rachel. I've been fielding calls all weekend from board members, investors, media. Everyone wants to know what's happening. They're about to find out, Rachel said as they stepped into the elevator. Is everything set up? Conference room is ready, your presentation is loaded on the system, and the attorneys are already here. They arrived an hour ago to review the evidence. Laura paused, then added quietly, Rachel, Andrew's been here since 6 a.m. He's in his office with Richard, and at least 3 of the board members we know are compromised. They're planning something. Let them plan, Rachel said with more confidence than she felt. Let them think they've got this all figured out. It'll make the reveal that much more satisfying. The executive floor was eerily quiet, most people not arriving until 8:30 or 9. Rachel's office was exactly as she'd left it, minimalist and professional, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Lower Manhattan. Her desk was clear except for a single photo of her late mother taken at Rachel's college graduation. Her mother had been sick by then, the cancer already spreading, but she'd insisted on attending, on seeing her daughter walk across that stage. I'm doing this for you too, Mom, Rachel whispered to the photo. You built the foundation of this company. You believed in using technology to save lives, not just to make money. I'm not going to let them destroy that legacy." Laura appeared in the doorway. "It's 8:45. People are starting to gather in the boardroom. Margaret Chen is here, and James Peterson. Susan Rodriguez just arrived. David Kim is on his way up from the lobby." "And Andrew?" Rachel asked. "Already in the boardroom. He looks confident, smug even." Laura's expression was grim. "Rachel, he brought lawyers. 3 of them. And Richard is passing around some kind of document. I couldn't see what it was, but people are reading it and looking concerned." "Then I guess it's time to crash their party," Rachel said, picking up her presentation materials and the folder containing all the evidence of Andrew's embezzlement. "How do I look?" "Like someone who's about to end some careers," Laura said with fierce satisfaction. "Go get them, boss." The boardroom was on the 42nd floor, a massive space with a conference table that could seat 30 people and windows that offered views in 3 directions. Rachel had presided over hundreds of meetings in this room, but walking in today felt different, like entering an arena where she'd have to fight for her professional life. Andrew was indeed already there, looking polished and confident in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Jack made in a month. He was surrounded by his legal team and several board members Rachel recognized as being compromised by his bribes. Richard sat at his right hand, wearing an expression of barely concealed triumph. "Rachel," Andrew said smoothly as she entered, "how good of you to join us. We were beginning to worry you might not show up." "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Rachel replied, her tone pleasant but her eyes cold. She took her seat at the head of the table, her seat, the CEO's chair, and made a show of arranging her materials with calm precision. Margaret Chen and the other trusted board members she'd met with Sunday evening took seats on either side of her, creating a visible divide in the room. On one side were Rachel's allies. On the other were Andrew's compromised board members. And in the middle were a handful of board members whose loyalties remained unclear, people who might swing either way depending on how the next hour unfolded. By 9 o'clock, all 15 board members were present, along with legal counsel, the company's CFO, though that was Andrew, currently occupying a strange dual role as both board member and subject of today's proceedings, and several senior executives who'd been asked to attend. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the kind of anticipatory energy that preceded major battles. Richard Morgan, Rachel's half-brother and constant rival, called the meeting to order with an air of authority that didn't actually belong to him. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice. I know this is an unusual Monday morning meeting, but circumstances have made it necessary. As most of you are aware, there was an incident last week involving our CEO, Rachel Morgan, and our CFO, Andrew K. Fax. Given the seriousness of that incident and its potential impact on the company's reputation, we felt it important to address the situation immediately." Rachel watched him speak, noting how carefully he was framing things. Not Andrew assaulted Rachel, but an incident involving both of them. Not Rachel was the victim, but the situation needs to be addressed. Classic manipulation, setting up the narrative before the facts could complicate it. "We've prepared a resolution for the board to consider," Richard continued, nodding to one of the compromised board members who began distributing packets around the table. "Given Ms. Morgan's recent erratic behavior, including the public altercation at Newark Airport, her unexplained absence from multiple scheduled meetings, and concerns raised by several executives about her decision-making capacity, we're recommending a temporary leave of absence while we conduct a thorough review of her fitness to continue as CEO." Rachel forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression neutral, even as fury burned in her chest. This was the play, then. Not an outright coup, but a procedural removal disguised as concern for her well-being. It was brilliant in its way, because it gave cover to the board members who might be uncomfortable with a more blatant power grab. Who could object to a concerned board protecting the company from an unstable CEO? "That's an interesting proposal, Richard," Rachel said, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had started around the table. "But before we vote on my supposed instability, I'd like to present some information that might be relevant to this board's decision-making process." "Rachel, I don't think that's—" Andrew started, but Margaret Chen cut him off. "The CEO has a right to address the board before any vote regarding her position," Margaret said firmly. "That's standard procedure, unless you're suggesting we abandon all corporate governance protocols." Andrew's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Of course. By all means, Rachel, enlighten us. Rachel stood, picking up her remote control and activating the presentation screen at the front of the room. The first slide appeared, a simple title card that read, "The Truth About Morgan Technologies, a Pattern of Corruption." She watched the color drain from Andrew's face and felt a savage satisfaction. Over the past week, I've been conducting an investigation into certain financial irregularities at Morgan Technologies. What I found was deeply disturbing, a systematic pattern of embezzlement, bribery, and corporate manipulation that threatens everything this company stands for. "This is absurd," Richard interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. "Rachel, you're clearly not thinking clearly. These wild accusations are backed by extensive documentation, financial records, and witness testimony," Rachel interrupted, "which I'll be happy to present. But first, let me address the incident at Newark Airport that's being used to justify my removal." She clicked to the next slide, which showed stills from airport security footage. Andrew grabbing her arm, Rachel's face contorted in pain, the moment when Jack had intervened. These images are from security cameras at Newark Liberty International Airport on the evening of October 10th. As you can see, Andrew Kayfax grabbed my already injured shoulder and refused to release me when I asked him to. This was not a mutual altercation. This was an assault, witnessed by dozens of people and documented by airport security. The police report, which I'm happy to provide, lists Mr. Kayfax as the aggressor and notes that he was detained for questioning. One of the undecided board members, an older woman named Patricia Foster, spoke up. "Andrew, is this true? Did you assault Rachel?" "It was a misunderstanding," Andrew said quickly. "We were arguing about business matters. Things got heated." "I said, please don't hit me. I'm already hurt," Rachel cut in, her voice hardening. "Those were my exact words, captured on video and corroborated by multiple witnesses. Does that sound like a mutual argument to you?" The room had gone very quiet. Rachel could see some board members looking at Andrew with new suspicion, while others, his allies, were starting to look worried about where this was going. "But let's move past my personal situation," Rachel continued, clicking to the next slide. "Because what Andrew Kayfax did to me personally is far less important than what he's been doing to this company. For the past 18 months, Mr. Kayfax has been systematically embezzling funds from Morgan Technologies through a shell company called Kayfax Strategic Advisors." The next series of slides showed financial records, payments to the consulting firm traced back to Andrew's brother, patterns of fund transfers that made the embezzlement clear. Rachel walked the board through each piece of evidence methodically, watching as comprehension dawned on the faces of those who hadn't been part of Andrew's scheme. In total, Andrew Kayfax has stolen approximately $8 million from this company, Rachel said. But that's not all. He's also been using company funds to bribe board members, paying them through speaking fees, advisory contracts, and stock options in his brother's company in exchange for their votes on key issues. She clicked to another slide showing the connections between payments and voting patterns. Notice how every major decision that went against my recommendations, shelving the cancer detection software, approving the merger with Kayfax Tech, expanding Andrew's authority as CFO, was preceded by payments to specific board members. Payments that weren't disclosed, weren't approved by the full board, and appear to constitute clear violations of fiduciary duty. This is slander. One of the compromised board members, a venture capitalist named Derek Stone, jumped to his feet. "You can't just throw around accusations like this without evidence?" Rachel interrupted smoothly. "But I have evidence, Mr. Stone, extensive evidence, including records showing that you personally received $450,000 in consulting fees from Kayfax Strategic Advisors over the past year. Curious, isn't it, how those payments correlate with your votes in favor of Mr. Kayfax's proposals?" Derek's face went red, then white. "Those were legitimate consulting arrangements. For consulting on what, exactly?" Margaret Chen asked sharply. "You're a venture capitalist, Mr. Stone. What consulting services could you possibly provide to a strategic advisory firm that happens to be owned by our CFO's brother? Services that just happen to be needed right before every major board vote?" The room erupted into competing voices, some board members demanding explanations, others trying to defend themselves. Andrew's lawyers huddling with their client in urgent whispers. Rachel let the chaos build for a moment before raising her voice. "There's more," she said, and the room quieted again, everyone turning to look at her. The merger agreement between Morgan Technologies and Kfax Tech contains clauses that would give Andrew Kfax controlling interest in the combined company, but only after we're married. And if I should die or be declared mentally incompetent within 5 years of the merger, all my shares transfer directly to him. She let that sink in, watching as the implications registered. So let me paint you a picture of what's been happening. Andrew Kfax has been embezzling millions from this company while simultaneously bribing board members to support his agenda. He orchestrated a merger that would give him control of everything I've built, contingent on our marriage. And when I started asking too many questions, when I began to resist his control, he became increasingly aggressive, culminating in a public assault that he's now trying to spin as evidence of my instability. Rachel leaned forward, her hands on the table, her voice dropping to something quieter but far more dangerous. This isn't about my fitness to lead. This is about Andrew Kfax executing a calculated plan to steal my company while destroying my credibility. And some of you, she looked directly at the compromised board members, have been helping him do it either because he's been paying you or because you've been too blind to see what's happening. You have no proof of any of this, Richard said, but his voice wavered. These are just conspiracy theories, wild accusations from someone who's clearly having a breakdown. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, we have extensive proof. Everyone turned to see two people entering the boardroom, a woman in a crisp FBI suit and a man wearing the badge of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Margaret Chen had clearly made good on her promise to bring in law enforcement. Special Agent Jennifer Morales, FBI White Collar Crime Division, the woman said, flashing her credentials. And this is Investigator Peter Chen from the SEC. We've been reviewing the evidence Miss Morgan provided regarding financial crimes at Morgan Technologies, and we have some questions for several individuals in this room. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Derek Stone bolted for the door, only to find it blocked by additional federal agents. Two other compromised board members started talking over each other, trying to explain their innocence. Andrew's lawyers immediately invoked attorney-client privilege and told him not to say anything, and Richard Morgan looked like he might actually be sick, all his smug confidence evaporating as federal investigators began reading people their rights. Through it all, Rachel remained standing at the head of the table, watching her carefully constructed trap snap shut around the people who tried to destroy her. She felt Margaret's hand squeeze her arm in support and heard James Peterson whisper, "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen in a boardroom." The next 2 hours were a blur of official statements, attorney conferences, and FBI interviews. Andrew was led out in handcuffs, his lawyers protesting loudly but ineffectively, along with 3 board members who'd been most deeply implicated in the bribery scheme. Richard managed to avoid immediate arrest, but was informed that he was under investigation and should retain legal counsel. By noon, the boardroom had cleared of everyone except Rachel, Margaret, James, Susan, David, and Patricia Foster. The board members who'd either been her allies from the start or had quickly aligned themselves with her once the evidence became clear. I think it's safe to say that was the most eventful board meeting in Morgan Technologies' history, David Kim said dryly, pouring himself a stiff drink from the bar cart in the corner of the room. Rachel, I've been in this industry for 4 decades, and I have never seen anything like what you just pulled off. I had help, Rachel said, sinking into a chair with sudden exhaustion now that the adrenaline was wearing off. A lot of help. Margaret, you coordinated with law enforcement. James, you brought in outside counsel. Susan, you prepared the investor statements. I couldn't have done this alone. But you're the one who uncovered it, Patricia Foster pointed out. You're the one who could have walked away, who could have accepted the settlement they were probably prepared to offer you, and instead chose to fight. That took extraordinary courage. Or extraordinary stubbornness, Rachel said with a weak laugh. I'm not always sure which. Both, Margaret said firmly. You needed both to pull this off. And now we need to talk about what comes next. Because this company is about to be all over the news. CEO exposes massive embezzlement and corruption scheme, federal arrests, the whole 9 yards. We need a plan for managing this crisis. They spent the next hour doing exactly that, crafting statements for the press, planning investor calls, discussing how to stabilize the company through what would undoubtedly be a turbulent period. Rachel participated in the planning, but she felt strangely detached, as if she were watching herself from a distance. Finally, Susan Rodriguez voiced the question that had been hovering unspoken in the room. Rachel, do you want to continue as CEO? Because I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we fully support you keeping that role. You've proven you have the integrity and courage this company needs. But if you need time after everything you've been through, we'd understand that too. Rachel looked around the table at these people who'd stood by her, who'd believed in her when it would have been easier to side with Andrew's version of events. They deserved an honest answer. I don't know, she admitted. A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Being CEO of Morgan Technologies has been my entire identity for so long that I couldn't imagine anything else. But this weekend, I spent time with people who reminded me that there are other ways to build a life, other ways to make an impact. And I found myself questioning whether this— She gestured to the boardroom, the building, the empire she'd constructed— is really what I want anymore, or if it's just what I've been doing for so long that I forgot to ask if it still serves me. That's fair, James said thoughtfully. And you don't have to decide today. Why don't you take a leave of absence, a real one, not the manufactured kind Andrew was trying to force on you. Take a few weeks, get some distance, figure out what you actually want. We can bring in an interim CEO to manage day-to-day operations while you think. And if I decide I don't want to come back, Rachel asked. Then we find someone else, Margaret said simply. Rachel, you built something amazing here, but you're not obligated to run it forever just because you created it. Companies evolve, leadership changes, and that's okay. The question isn't what you owe Morgan Technologies, the question is what you want for your own life. Rachel felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Can I think about it? Take you up on that leave of absence and actually figure out what I want? Of course, David said. Take all the time you need. We'll hold down the fort. Laura was waiting outside the boardroom, looking anxious. Well, how bad is it? Andrew's arrested, several board members are under investigation, and I've been offered a leave of absence to figure out if I still want this job, Rachel summarized. So either really bad or really good, depending on your perspective. And what's your perspective? Laura asked. I'll tell you when I figure it out, Rachel said. Can you handle things here for a few days? I need to not be here for a while. Of course, Laura said immediately. Go, take care of yourself. The company will survive without you for a few days. Rachel collected her belongings from her office, taking only her personal items and leaving everything else. She paused at the door, looking back at the space that had been her second home for years. It felt strange to walk away, even temporarily, but also liberating, like setting down a weight she'd been carrying for too long. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. How did it go? Rachel smiled, feeling warmth spread through her despite the exhaustion. She typed back, I won. Can you pick me up? I'm ready to come home. His response was immediate. On our way. Sophie's bringing celebratory cookies she insisted we bake this morning. Rachel made her way down to the lobby, ignoring the stares and whispers from employees who'd clearly heard that something dramatic had happened on the executive floor. The rain had stopped, and weak afternoon sunlight was breaking through the clouds, painting the street in gold and shadow. Jack's car pulled up 15 minutes later, and Rachel climbed in to find Sophie practically bouncing in her seat. Did you beat the bad people? Sophie demanded. Daddy wouldn't tell me anything except that you were okay, but I want to know if you won. I won, Rachel confirmed, accepting the slightly misshapen cookie Sophie thrust into her hands. The bad people are in a lot of trouble, and the company is safe. I knew you would win, Sophie said with absolute confidence, because you're brave like Wonder Woman, and bad people never win when brave people stand up to them. That's how stories work. If only real life were as simple as stories, Rachel murmured, but she was smiling. Jack caught her eye in the rearview mirror. You okay? I'm exhausted, emotionally drained, and questioning every life choice I've made for the past decade, Rachel said honestly. But yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. They drove back to Jack's apartment, with Sophie providing a detailed narration of their cookie baking adventure and all the reasons why chocolate chip cookies were scientifically superior to all other types of cookies. Rachel half listened, mostly just enjoying the sound of Sophie's voice and the normalcy of the conversation after the intensity of the morning. Back at the apartment, Rachel changed out of her power suit and into borrowed sweatpants and a t-shirt, feeling the corporate armor fall away with her professional clothes. She emerged from the guest room to find Jack in the kitchen, starting dinner prep, while Sophie did homework at the table. "Can I help?" Rachel asked, and Jack handed her a cutting board and vegetables without comment. They worked in companionable silence for a while, falling into the rhythm they'd established over the weekend. Rachel found the repetitive motion of chopping vegetables soothing, grounding her back in the present moment after the surreal drama of the morning. "So what happens now?" Jack asked eventually. "With the company, I mean." "They offered me a leave of absence," Rachel said. "Time to figure out if I still want to be CEO or if I want to do something different with my life." "And what do you want?" Rachel set down her knife and looked at him. "Honestly, for the first time in my adult life, I have no idea. And that's terrifying, but also kind of exciting. I've spent so long following a predetermined path, build the company, grow the company, defend the company, that I never stopped to ask if that path was taking me where I actually wanted to go." "Where do you want to go?" Sophie piped up from the table, apparently listening to their conversation despite appearing focused on her math worksheet. "I don't know yet," Rachel admitted, "but I think I'd like to spend some time figuring that out. Maybe work on projects that feel meaningful instead of just profitable. Maybe actually take weekends off and learn what normal people do when they're not working 80 hours a week. Maybe—" She hesitated, then continued, "maybe build relationships that matter more than building empires." Sophie nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Daddy says the best adventures are the ones where you don't know what's going to happen. He says that's called being open to possibilities." "Your daddy is a very smart man," Rachel said, meeting Jack's eyes and seeing something warm and hopeful there. After dinner, a simple pasta dish that somehow tasted better than any of the expensive restaurant meals Rachel usually ate. Sophie insisted on showing Rachel her completed homework, explaining each math problem with the seriousness of a professor lecturing grad students. Jack listened with patient attention, offering gentle corrections when Sophie's logic went astray, but mostly just letting her work through the problems herself. "You're good at this," Rachel observed after Sophie had been sent to brush her teeth and get ready for bed. "At letting her figure things out on her own while still being there if she needs help. That's harder than it looks." "It's basically the whole job of parenting," Jack said, loading the dishwasher. "You want to protect them from every mistake and every hurt, but you also know they need to experience some challenges to grow. Finding that balance between support and independence is something I'm constantly figuring out." "Is that your subtle way of giving me advice about my own situation?" Rachel asked with a slight smile. "Maybe," Jack admitted. "You've been working incredibly hard to fix your company, to protect what you built, and that's admirable. But at some point, you might need to let it figure things out on its own while you focus on your own growth. Morgan Technologies is strong enough to survive without you micromanaging every detail. The question is whether you're strong enough to let it." "You're doing it again," Rachel said. "That thing where you say something simple that completely reframes how I'm thinking about everything." "It's a gift," Jack said with mock solemnity. "One of my few talents, along with making pancakes and removing splinters without causing emotional trauma." Sophie called from her room, requesting bedtime stories, and Jack excused himself to handle the nighttime routine. Rachel cleaned up the rest of the kitchen, finding satisfaction in the simple domestic task. Through the walls, she could hear Jack's voice reading some story about magical creatures, his tone animated and engaging. Sophie's laughter rang out at something funny, followed by demands that he do the voice again, Daddy, but make it sillier this time. This was what a home sounded like, Rachel thought, not the expensive silence of her penthouse, where everything was so carefully designed that there was no room for mess or spontaneity or life. This was laughter and dishes clattering and the comfortable sounds of people who loved each other navigating an ordinary evening. When Jack emerged from Sophie's room half an hour later, he found Rachel curled up on the couch with one of his books, a thriller she'd been halfway through over the weekend. She finally settled down, Jack said, collapsing into the armchair with a sigh. But not before making me promise that you'd still be here for breakfast tomorrow. Apparently you're now a permanent fixture in her morning routine. Is that okay? Rachel asked. I don't want to overstay my welcome or confuse her about what this is. What is this? Jack asked directly, his eyes meeting hers. Because I know we said we'd figure it out later, after your corporate crisis was resolved. But it's later now, and I think we should probably talk about it. Rachel set down her book, her heart beating faster. I care about you, both of you, more than I probably should after less than a week. And I know that's crazy that normal people don't develop feelings this quickly, but there's nothing normal about how we met or the circumstances that brought me here. I care about you too, Jack said quietly. But Rachel, I have to be careful. Sophie's already attached to you. She's talking about you like you're part of our family, making plans that include you in our future. And if you're just figuring things out and I'm part of that exploration, I need to know. Because I can handle my own heart getting broken. I've done it before. But I won't let Sophie get hurt because I wasn't careful enough about who we let into our lives. I understand, Rachel said, and she did. You're protecting her. That's exactly what a good parent should do. And I can't promise you I have everything figured out because I don't. A week ago, I was engaged to someone else, running a company, living a completely different life. Now I'm here, questioning everything, not sure what I want or where I'm going. Then maybe we should slow down, Jack suggested, though his expression suggested the words cost him something. Maybe you should take that leave of absence, get your own place, figure out your life without the complication of whatever this is between us. And then, when you're more settled, when you know what you want, we can revisit this conversation. Rachel knew he was right, knew it was the sensible, mature, responsible thing to do. But looking at him across the small living room, thinking about walking away from the peace she'd found in this modest apartment, the idea felt unbearable. What if I don't want to slow down? She asked quietly. What if I've spent my entire life being sensible and careful and planning every move, and I'm tired of it? What if for once I want to make a decision based on how I feel instead of what makes strategic sense? Then tell me how you feel, Jack said, leaning forward in his chair. Not what you think you should feel, not what would be convenient or logical, just the truth. Rachel took a deep breath, forcing herself to be as honest as she'd been in that boardroom this morning. I feel like I found something here that I didn't even know I was missing. I feel like when I'm with you and Sophie, I can be myself instead of performing some version of myself that other people expect. I feel like this apartment, this cramped, modest space with its secondhand furniture and crayon drawings, feels more like home than my penthouse ever did. And that terrifies me because I barely know you, and this could all fall apart and I could end up hurt or, worse, I could hurt Sophie, but I also feel like if I walk away without even trying, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Jack was quiet for a long moment, and Rachel felt her heart hammering against her ribs, waiting for his response. Finally, he stood and crossed to the couch, sitting beside her and taking her hand in his. Okay, he said simply, then let's try. But we do this right, slow, careful, putting Sophie's needs first. You get your own place so you have space to figure out your life. We date like normal people, not like you're a refugee I took in during a crisis. And we're honest with each other about how this is working, especially if it stops working. Deal? Deal, Rachel agreed, then added with a slight smile. Though I have to point out that getting my own place and dating like normal people is still pretty accelerated, given that we met less than a week ago. Yeah, well, nothing about this has been normal, Jack said, returning her smile. Might as well lean into it. They sat like that for a while, hands intertwined, not speaking but not needing to. Through the window, Rachel could see lights coming on in neighboring apartments. Other families, other lives, other people navigating their own complicated relationships and uncertain futures. The world was full of chaos and corruption and people who hurt each other. But it was also full of this. Quiet moments of connection, small acts of courage, the possibility of building something new from the ruins of what came before. Eventually, Rachel excused herself to the guest room, needing sleep after the emotional exhaustion of the day. But before she closed her door, she heard Jack's voice from the living room. Hey, Rachel. She turned back. Yeah? For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're part of our lives now. Whatever happens next, this week, it's meant something to both of us. To me too, Rachel said softly. More than you know. That night, lying in the familiar guest bed with its handmade quilt and lavender-scented sheets, Rachel thought about the conversation with Jack and the decision she'd made to stay, to try, to build something with these people who'd reminded her what mattered. It was risky and uncertain and possibly stupid. But it was also real in a way that nothing in her carefully constructed life had been for years. She thought about Morgan Technologies and the decision she'd eventually need to make about her role there. She thought about the cancer detection software that could save lives if she could find a way to bring it to market outside the corporate structure that had tried to bury it. She thought about possibilities and fresh starts, and the terrifying freedom of not having her entire future mapped out. But mostly, she thought about Jack's steady presence and Sophie's unconditional affection and the way this small apartment had become a sanctuary when she'd needed it most. She thought about pancakes and hiking trails and telescope lessons still to come. She thought about building a life based on what brought her joy instead of what brought her success. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rachel Morgan fell asleep with a smile on her face, not because she had all the answers, but because she'd finally found the courage to start asking the right questions. 3 months later, Rachel stood in front of a converted warehouse in Newark, keys in hand, and felt something she'd almost forgotten, genuine excitement about the future. The building wasn't much to look at from the outside. Red brick weathered by decades of industrial use, windows that needed replacing, a loading dock that hadn't seen a truck in years. But inside, Rachel saw possibility. "You're sure about this?" Laura asked, standing beside her with a tablet full of renovation plans and budget projections. "It's a big risk, walking away from Morgan Technologies to start something completely new." "I'm terrified," Rachel admitted. "But I'm also more certain about this than I've been about anything in years. Morgan Tech was my mother's dream that became mine by default. This," she gestured to the warehouse, "this is actually mine." The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of change. Rachel had officially resigned as CEO of Morgan Technologies, though she'd retained her seat on the board and a significant equity stake. The company had weathered the scandal better than expected, largely because Rachel's decisive action in exposing the corruption had been seen as evidence of strong leadership rather than instability. With Andrew in federal custody awaiting trial and the compromised board members removed, Morgan Tech had actually seen its stock price rise as investors gained confidence in the company's renewed commitment to ethical practices. But Rachel had discovered something during her leave of absence. She didn't miss the boardroom battles or the constant pressure to maximize shareholder value. What she missed was the early days when Morgan Technologies had been about solving problems and helping people rather than about quarterly earnings and market dominance. So she'd made a decision that had shocked everyone except Jack and Sophie. She was starting over. "Morgan Life Sciences," Laura read from the sign being installed over the warehouse entrance. "I like it. Honors your mother's legacy but makes it clear this is something new. The goal is to focus exclusively on medical technology that saves lives, even if it's not immediately profitable," Rachel explained, walking through the space that would soon house laboratories and offices. "Starting with the cancer detection software that Morgan Tech shelved. I licensed it from the company, paid fair market value, all above board, and now we're going to bring it to market regardless of the profit margins." "And you're funding this how?" Laura asked, though she already knew the answer. "Combination of my own money, grant funding, and investors who care more about impact than returns," Rachel said. "I pitched at a social venture capital forum last month. Jack and Sophie came to watch, and having them in the audience reminded me why I was doing this. The investors stood up and applauded when I finished. We're fully funded for the first 2 years." Laura smiled, remembering that pitch. She'd been there too, watching Rachel present with a passion and authenticity that had been missing from her corporate presentations for years. This wasn't CEO Rachel performing for shareholders. This was Dr. Rachel Morgan. She'd started using her PhD again, sharing research that could change the world. "So when do you officially move in here?" Laura asked. "Next week," Rachel said. "I've hired a small team, 3 researchers from Morgan Tech who are frustrated by the commercial focus, 2 software engineers who believe in the mission, and a project manager who has experience bringing medical devices through FDA approval. It's lean, but that's intentional. I don't want to build another empire. I want to build something meaningful. And where does that leave you and Jack? Laura asked carefully. She'd watched her former boss navigate this new relationship over the past 3 months, with unusual caution, clearly trying to do things right. Rachel's face softened at the mention of Jack's name. We're taking it slow. I got my own apartment, small place about 10 minutes from his, nothing fancy. We have dinner together 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine. Sophie comes to my apartment on Saturdays, and we've established a routine of farmer's market in the morning and cooking together in the afternoon. It's... She paused, searching for the right word. It's healthy, real, no drama, no intensity, just 2 people getting to know each other while also making sure Sophie feels secure. But, Laura prompted, hearing the hesitation. But I'm ready for more, Rachel admitted. I know we agreed to take things slow and I understand why. But 3 months in, I'm more certain about him than I was about Andrew after 3 years. Jack grounds me, challenges me, makes me want to be better. And Sophie? Rachel's voice caught slightly. Sophie's become one of the most important people in my life. When I imagine my future now, they're both in it, centrally in it. Have you told Jack that? Not yet, Rachel said. I've been waiting for the right moment, which is probably just me being scared. What if he doesn't feel the same way? What if I'm rushing things again and he thinks I'm not ready for serious commitment? Rachel, Laura said with the frankness of someone who'd worked closely with her for years, that man looked at you like you hung the moon the first time I met him. When he brought Sophie to your pitch presentation and she held up a handmade sign that said, "Go Ms. Morgan," he was watching you with this expression of complete adoration. He's not going to think you're rushing things. He's probably waiting for you to catch up to where he already is. Before Rachel could respond, her phone rang. Jack's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with a smile that was becoming automatic whenever she heard from him. "Hey you," she said. "What's up?" "Quick question," Jack said, and she could hear Sophie singing in the background. "Sophie wants to know if you can come to her piano recital tonight. I know it's last minute, and you probably have work stuff, but she's been asking all morning, and I told her I'd at least check." "What time?" Rachel asked, warmth flooding through her at the invitation. 7 o'clock at the school auditorium. She's playing Für Elise and she's nervous about it, but she said having you there would help her be brave. Rachel checked her calendar, though she already knew she'd move anything to be there. "Tell Sophie I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll be in the front row." "You don't have to sit in the front row," Jack said, but she could hear the pleasure in his voice. "Parents usually take those seats." "Then I guess it's good that I'm—" Rachel stopped, the word family dying on her lips because they hadn't defined what she was to Sophie, and she didn't want to overstep. "I'll be there at 6:30, she finished instead. After ending the call, Rachel found Laura watching her with a knowing expression. "What?" Rachel asked. "You're in love with him," Laura said simply, "and with Sophie. And you're terrified of admitting it because the last time you trusted someone with your heart, he tried to steal your company and have you declared incompetent." "When did you become so perceptive about my personal life?" Rachel asked, but she didn't deny it. "I've been working with you for 5 years, Laura said. "I know when you're calculating business risks versus when you're dealing with emotional ones. This is emotional, and you're overthinking it. Just tell the man how you feel. What's the worst that could happen?" "He could not feel the same way, and I'd lose the best thing in my life," Rachel said quietly. "Or he could feel exactly the same way, and you'd gain everything you've been missing," Laura countered. "Rachel, you walked into a boardroom and faced down federal charges, exposed massive corruption, and risked your entire career for what was right. You can handle telling a good man that you love him." Rachel spent the rest of the afternoon touring the warehouse with contractors and making final decisions about laboratory layouts. But her mind kept drifting to the piano recital, to Sophie's nervous excitement, to Jack's steady presence that had become as essential to her as breathing. Laura was right. She needed to tell him how she felt. Tonight, after the recital, she'd find the courage to be as honest about her feelings as she'd been about Andrew's corruption. She arrived at the elementary school at 6:20, early enough to secure a seat in the front row as promised. The auditorium was filling with parents and siblings, everyone dressed in their business casual best for their children's performances. Rachel had changed from her warehouse touring clothes into a simple dress that Sophie had once said made her look like a princess. and she clutched a small bouquet of flowers she'd picked up from a vendor near her apartment. Jack spotted her as he entered with Sophie, who was wearing a navy blue dress with white trim and had her hair pulled back in an elaborate braid that Jack had clearly struggled with. There were a few loose pieces, and the braid was slightly lopsided, but the effort was endearing. "Ms. Morgan!" Sophie broke away from her father and ran down the aisle, throwing her arms around Rachel's waist. "You came! You really came!" "Of course I came," Rachel said, returning the hug. "I promised, didn't I? And I brought you these for after your performance." She handed Sophie the flowers, which earned her a smile bright enough to light the entire auditorium. "They're beautiful. Daddy, look what Miss Morgan brought me." Jack had followed his daughter down the aisle, and when his eyes met Rachel's, she saw something there that made her breath catch. Tenderness mixed with longing, affection mixed with restraint. He wanted more too, she realized. He'd been holding back for the same reasons she had, both of them careful and cautious because the stakes felt impossibly high. "That was really thoughtful," Jack said, his voice warm. "Sophie's been talking about you coming all week. It means a lot to her, to both of us." Sophie's music teacher called for performers to head backstage, and Sophie squeezed Rachel's hand one more time before scampering off, clutching her flowers like a talisman. Jack settled into the seat beside Rachel, their shoulders touching in the crowded auditorium. "How was the warehouse?" Jack asked quietly as the lights began to dim. "Perfect," Rachel said. "Absolutely perfect. We start moving in equipment next week, and we should be operational within a month. It's really happening, Jack. I'm actually doing this." "I never doubted you would," Jack said, and the simple confidence in his voice made Rachel want to kiss him, right there in the elementary school auditorium. The recital began with younger students playing simple pieces with varying degrees of success. Parents clapped enthusiastically, regardless of mistakes, and Rachel found herself charmed by the whole thing. The nervous giggles, the proud parents, the sense of community that came from supporting children in their achievements, however small. When Sophie's turn came, Rachel felt her own nervousness spike. Sophie walked on stage with careful dignity, sat at the piano, and positioned her hands over the keys with the seriousness of a concert pianist. She looked out into the audience, found Rachel and Jack in the front row, and gave them a small smile before beginning. The opening notes of Für Elise filled the auditorium, and Rachel was stunned by how well Sophie played. There were a few hesitations, a couple of missed notes that she recovered from quickly, but overall, it was a genuinely impressive performance for an 8-year-old. Rachel glanced at Jack and saw tears glistening in his eyes as he watched his daughter, his face radiating pride and love so pure it made Rachel's chest ache. This was what family looked like, she thought. Not the cold, competitive relationship she'd had with her half-brother Richard, not the transactional partnership she'd mistaken for love with Andrew. This was a father watching his daughter accomplish something difficult, bursting with pride at her courage. This was a child looking into the audience for the people who mattered most, needing their presence to feel brave enough to perform, and Rachel was part of it now. Sophie had looked for her, had needed her there. Jack had called to invite her, had saved her a seat in the front row. Somehow, in just 3 months, she'd been woven into the fabric of their small family, become essential to their happiness in a way that still amazed her. When Sophie finished, the applause was thunderous, probably louder than was strictly warranted by the performance, but that was what you did for kids who were brave enough to try. Sophie stood and took a formal bow, then bounded off the stage and straight into her father's arms. "Did you see? I did it. I didn't mess up too much." "You were amazing, baby girl," Jack said, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you." Sophie turned to Rachel, still in her father's arms. "Did I make you proud too, Miss Morgan?" "So proud," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion she wasn't entirely prepared for. "You were absolutely brilliant, Sophie. Beautiful and brave and perfect." After the recital, they went for ice cream at Sophie's favorite shop, a local place with mismatched furniture and flavors named after local landmarks. Sophie talked nonstop about the recital, reliving every moment and analyzing her performance with the intensity of a professional musician. "I think I need to practice the middle section more," Sophie said seriously, attacking her chocolate chip cookie dough with determination. "Mrs. Patterson says the transitions are the hardest part, and that's where I almost messed up. But I recovered well, didn't I, Daddy?" You recovered perfectly, Jack confirmed. That's the mark of a real performer. Not whether you make mistakes, but how you handle them when you do. Is that like in business? Sophie asked Rachel. You told me that when you found out the bad people were doing bad things, you had to figure out how to fix it. That's like recovering from a mistake, right? Very similar, Rachel agreed, impressed as always by Sophie's ability to connect seemingly disparate concepts. Leadership is often about how you respond when things go wrong, not just how you perform when everything's going right. They talked and laughed for another hour, and Rachel found herself studying Jack across the small table. He had ice cream on his sleeve from where Sophie had gestured enthusiastically with her spoon. His hair was rumpled from running his hands through it during Sophie's performance, and he looked absolutely exhausted from a long day at the hospital, followed by the stress of Sophie's recital. He was also the most attractive person Rachel had ever seen, not because of physical perfection, but because of the kindness that radiated from him, the patience he showed his daughter, the way he made everyone around him feel valued and heard. She loved him. The realization wasn't new, she'd been circling it for weeks. But sitting in this ice cream shop watching him help Sophie avoid getting chocolate on her dress, Rachel felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She loved Jack Miller, this single father who'd rebuilt his life from tragedy and raised an extraordinary daughter against all odds. She loved Sophie, this bright, curious child who'd welcomed Rachel into her life with uncomplicated enthusiasm. And she wanted to build a future with both of them, wanted to be part of their small family, wanted to stop being careful and cautious and just embrace what she'd found. Sophie, Jack said, checking his watch, we need to get you home soon. It's way past your bedtime. But I'm not tired, Sophie protested, though her yawning contradicted her words. Can Miss Morgan come with us? She could help with my bedtime story. Jack glanced at Rachel, and she saw the question in his eyes. Was she ready for this level of domestic intimacy, for being part of Sophie's nighttime routine? It felt significant somehow, more serious than their carefully casual dinners and Saturday morning farmers market trips. I'd love to, Rachel said, and watched Jack's expression shift to something that looked like relief mixed with joy. Back at the apartment, Sophie went through her bedtime routine with the efficiency of someone who'd been promised a story if she hurried. Jack supervised teeth brushing and pajama changing while Rachel waited in the living room, looking at the familiar space that had been her sanctuary 3 months ago. The crayon drawings on the walls had been updated. There were new ones now, including several that featured 3 stick figures instead of 2. Rachel studied these additions, seeing herself represented in purple crayon with yellow hair and what appeared to be a smile. She started adding you about a month ago, Jack said quietly, coming to stand beside her. I found her drawing one night and asked who the third person was, and she said that's Miss Morgan, obviously. She's part of our family now. Jack, Rachel started, but he held up a hand. I know we said we were taking things slow, and we have been, probably slower than either of us actually wanted. But Rachel, Sophie's not the only one who thinks of you as family now. And I think we need to talk about what that means. After the story, Rachel said, let's not have this conversation where Sophie might overhear and get confused. She deserves clarity about what we are to each other. Sophie's room was exactly as Rachel remembered. Stuffed animals, book overflow, and the telescope by the window. Sophie was already in bed, Mr. Hopscotch clutched in her arms, when Rachel and Jack entered. Will you both do the story? Sophie asked hopefully. Daddy can do the main voices, and Ms. Morgan can do the princess voice because she sounds pretty, like a princess. They settled on either side of Sophie's bed, and Jack began reading from a well-worn copy of a fairy tale about a princess who saved herself. He did different voices for each character, while Rachel provided princess dialogue with theatrical flair that made Sophie giggle. It was silly and sweet and domestic, and Rachel felt her heart expanding to accommodate the sheer rightness of this moment. When the story ended, Sophie yawned hugely and snuggled deeper into her blankets. I'm glad you both came to my recital, she said sleepily. It made me feel brave knowing you were watching, like I had a whole team supporting me. You'll always have us supporting you, Jack said, kissing her forehead. No matter what. Both of you? Sophie asked, her eyes already closing. Ms. Morgan, too? Rachel met Jack's gaze over Sophie's head, saw him give a small nod, permission to make a promise that implied permanence. Both of us, Rachel confirmed softly. Always. Sophie smiled and drifted off to sleep almost immediately, exhausted from her big day. Jack adjusted her blankets and picked up Mr. Hopscotch from where he'd fallen onto the floor, placing him back in Sophie's arms. Then he and Rachel crept out of the room, leaving the door cracked open and the nightlight glowing. In the living room, they stood facing each other with the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Jack spoke. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that? Rachel nodded, her heart racing. I'm in love with you, Jack said simply. I know it's only been 3 months since we met, and I know we agreed to take things slow, but I can't keep pretending what I feel is casual or exploratory. I'm in love with you, Rachel. I love your intelligence and your courage and the way you chop vegetables in my kitchen like it's a form of meditation. I love how you talk to Sophie like she's a person whose opinions matter, not just a cute kid. I love that you walked away from a company you built because staying would have meant compromising your principles. I love that you're starting over at 32 because you finally figured out what you actually want to do with your life. He took a breath, then continued. But I also need you to understand what you'd be taking on if we make this official. I'm a package deal, me and Sophie, permanently. I'll never be the kind of partner who can drop everything for spontaneous trips or put you first always. Sophie will always be my top priority, and there will be times when that's frustrating or limiting. I work long hours at a hospital, I'm not wealthy, and my life is ordinary in ways that might feel boring after the excitement of running a billion-dollar company. So before you say anything, before you make any commitments, I need you to really think about whether this life, my life, our life, is what you want. Rachel waited to make sure he was finished, then stepped forward and took both his hands in hers. I'm in love with you too, she said, watching his face light up. And I have been for weeks, maybe from that first morning when you brought me breakfast in bed and told me it was okay to not have all the answers. I love that you're a package deal with Sophie, because she's part of why I love you, the way you parent her, the life you've built together, the values you're teaching her. I love that you prioritize her because it shows me who you are as a person. And Jack, I need you to understand something. My life isn't exciting anymore. I don't want excitement. I spent years chasing excitement and success and achievement, and it made me miserable. What I want is exactly this: dinner at your kitchen table, farmers market Saturdays, piano recitals, and bedtime stories. I want ordinary with you and Sophie because ordinary with people you love is actually extraordinary. You're sure? Jack asked, and she could hear the vulnerability in his voice. Because once you're in, once you commit to this, Sophie's going to bond even more deeply with you. And if it doesn't work out, if you change your mind, I'm not changing my mind, Rachel interrupted firmly. I'm 32 years old, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. But this, you and Sophie, this isn't a mistake. This is the most right thing I've ever felt. Jack pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was precious. Rachel pressed her face against his chest and breathed in the scent of him, clean cotton and the faint antiseptic smell of the hospital, and something uniquely Jack underneath it all. She felt his heart beating against her cheek and thought about how 3 months ago she'd been running from an abusive relationship and a corrupt company, lost and alone and convinced she'd failed at everything that mattered. Now she was here, in the arms of a man who loved her for who she actually was rather than what she could provide. She'd walked away from a billion-dollar empire and felt lighter for it. She'd started a new company focused on saving lives rather than maximizing profits. She'd found a family in the most unexpected place, a single father and his daughter who'd shown her what home really meant. So what happens now? Rachel asked, pulling back slightly to look up at Jack. Now we stop taking it slow, Jack said with a smile. Now we build this thing for real. But Rachel, I need to be honest with you about something else. Eventually, not today, not next month, but eventually, I'm going to want to marry you. I'm too old and too practical to date indefinitely. And if that's not where you see this going, it's where I see it going, Rachel interrupted. I want the whole thing, Jack. I want Sunday morning pancakes and soccer games and science fair projects. I want to be here for Sophie's graduations and her heartbreaks and her triumphs. I want to build a life with you, the boring, ordinary, absolutely perfect kind of life where the biggest drama is forgetting to buy milk at the grocery store. Jack laughed, and the sound was pure joy. You might be romanticizing ordinary life a bit. There's also unclogging toilets and arguing about whose turn it is to do laundry, and Sophie's attitude when she doesn't get her way. I'll take it, Rachel said. All of it. The beautiful parts and the frustrating parts and everything in between. They kissed then, finally, after 3 months of careful distance and restrained affection. It was soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the passionate kiss of new lovers unable to keep their hands off each other, but something deeper and more substantial. It was a kiss that said, I choose you, and I'm home, and let's build something that lasts. When they finally pulled apart, Jack was smiling in a way Rachel had never seen before, completely unguarded, radiantly happy. You know Sophie's going to lose her mind tomorrow when we tell her we're officially together, right? She's been not so subtly hinting that she thinks we should get married for weeks now. 8-year-olds aren't exactly known for their subtlety, Rachel observed, though I have to say she's got good instincts. We should get married. Jack blinked. Are you proposing to me? Not officially, Rachel said quickly. I'm just stating a fact about our future. When you do officially propose, because you're traditional that way, and you'll want to do it properly, I'm going to say yes. Consider this advance notice. You're impossible, Jack said, but he was still smiling. Completely impossible and absolutely perfect. They talked for hours that night, sitting on Jack's couch with Rachel curled against his side, making plans and sharing dreams. Rachel told him about Morgan Life Sciences and her hopes for bringing the cancer detection software to market. Jack told her about wanting to eventually move into teaching medicine at the university level, where he could shape the next generation of doctors and nurses while having more regular hours to spend with family. They talked about Sophie's future, her interest in science and music, her dreams of being an astronaut, the kind of support she'd need to reach her potential. They talked about practical things, too. Would Rachel eventually move in with them, or would they find a new place together? How would they navigate holidays and extended family? What would Sophie call Rachel once their relationship became official? She could keep calling me Ms. Morgan for now, Rachel suggested, until she's ready for something else. She's been asking if she can call you Rachel, Jack admitted. I told her she needed to ask your permission first, but I think eventually she's going to want to call you Mom, and I need to know how you'd feel about that. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of what he was asking. Taking on a parental role for Sophie wasn't something to agree to lightly. It meant responsibility and commitment that went beyond romantic love for Jack. It meant showing up for school conferences and doctor's appointments, for bad moods and teenage rebellion, for everything that came with raising a child. I'd be honored, Rachel said finally. Terrified but honored. I've never been anyone's mother before. What if I'm terrible at it? You won't be, Jack said with complete confidence. You're already halfway there. Sophie lights up when you're around, she trusts you with her feelings, and you treat her like a whole person. That's 90% of good parenting right there. The rest we'll figure out together. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with both of them, and Rachel reluctantly prepared to head back to her own apartment. But at the door, Jack caught her hand. Stay, he said quietly. Nothing has to happen. I'm not suggesting that. But it's late, and you're tired, and that guest room is yours for as long as you want it. Stay, and in the morning, we'll tell Sophie together that this is real now, that you're part of our family officially. Rachel stayed. She woke the next morning to the sound of Sophie's excited chatter and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she was disoriented, caught between sleeping and waking, unsure where she was. Then memory flooded back. The recital, the conversation with Jack, the promises they'd made. And Rachel smiled. She found Jack in the kitchen making pancakes while Sophie sat at the table drawing, both of them still in their pajamas. Miss Morgan! Sophie jumped up when Rachel appeared. You stayed over. Does this mean, are you and Daddy? She looked between them hopefully, hardly daring to finish the question. Come here, baby girl, Jack said, and Sophie scrambled into his lap. He looked at Rachel, who nodded her encouragement. Ms. Morgan and I talked last night, and we decided that we want to be together officially, like boyfriend and girlfriend, but more serious than that, which means she's going to be around a lot more. Is that okay with you? Is that okay? Sophie's voice went up several octaves. That's the best news ever. Wait, does this mean we're going to be a real family? Like with a mom and everything? Sophie, Jack started, but Rachel knelt down beside them, meeting Sophie's eager gaze. I'd like to be part of your family? Yes, Rachel said carefully, but I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace your mom or take her place. You had a mom who brought you into this world, and nothing changes that. What I'd like to be is someone else who loves you and wants to help take care of you. And maybe eventually, if you want, you could call me something other than Miss Morgan, but only if that feels right to you and only when you're ready. Sophie considered this seriously, then said, Could I call you Rachel? Because Ms. Morgan sounds too formal now that you're going to be part of our family, and maybe later, when I'm used to it, I could try calling you Mom, if that's okay. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. That would be more than okay. That would be wonderful. Sophie threw her arms around Rachel's neck in an exuberant hug. This is the best day ever, even better than my birthday. Can we call Aunt Marie and tell her? And can Rachel come to the park with us today? And can we— Breathe, baby girl, Jack said with a laugh. Yes to all of that, but first, pancakes. We can't make important family plans on an empty stomach. They spent the day as a family, official now, not just a single dad and his daughter and the woman who'd been carefully orbiting their lives. They went to the park where Jack and Sophie had their favorite hiking trail, and Rachel finally got to experience the full tour with Sophie's enthusiastic narration. They had a picnic lunch on Sophie's Thinking Rock, and Rachel listened while Sophie talked about her dreams for the future, how she wanted to be an astronaut but also maybe a piano teacher, and couldn't she do both? You can do anything you want, Rachel told her. That's the beauty of life. You don't have to figure it all out now. You get to explore and try new things and change your mind as you grow. Like you did, Sophie pointed out. Daddy told me you used to run a big company, but now you're starting a new company that helps sick people. You changed your mind about what you wanted to do. Exactly like that, Rachel confirmed. I spent a lot of years doing what I thought I was supposed to do, and then I finally figured out what I actually wanted to do. And you know what helped me figure it out? What? Sophie asked. Meeting you and your dad, Rachel said simply. You showed me that there are more important things than being successful in the way I thought success meant. You showed me what really matters. That afternoon, they called Jack's sister Marie to share the news. Marie's excited congratulations came through the speakerphone along with demands to meet Rachel properly and invitations to family dinners and barely veiled threats about what would happen if Rachel ever hurt her brother or niece. I like her, Rachel said after they hung up. She's protective, that's good. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Rachel split her time between launching Morgan Life Sciences and being present for Sophie's after-school activities. She learned the names of all Sophie's classmates and which ones were friends versus which ones were complicated Rachel, because sometimes they're nice and sometimes they're not. She attended parent-teacher conferences with Jack and felt a surge of pride when Sophie's teacher reported that she was excelling in all subjects but especially science and music. Morgan Life Sciences began to take shape, transforming from concept to reality. The cancer detection software underwent rigorous testing and refinement. Rachel hired additional researchers, including several from universities who were excited to work on a project focused purely on saving lives, rather than on profit margins. The media covered the story, billionaire CEO walks away from empire to start medical research company, and the attention brought both challenges and opportunities. One afternoon, about 2 months after Rachel and Jack had made their relationship official, Laura appeared at the warehouse with unusual news. You're not going to believe who just called, Laura said, pulling up a chair in Rachel's temporary office. The World Health Organization. They want to partner with us to bring the cancer detection software to developing countries. They're offering funding, distribution networks, everything we'd need to make this technology accessible globally. Rachel stared at her. Are you serious? Completely serious. They saw the coverage of what you're doing and reached out. Rachel, this could be huge. Not financially, they're offering grants and support, not investment returns. But in terms of impact, we're talking about millions of lives potentially saved. Rachel thought about her mother, who died of cancer that had been detected too late. She thought about all the people who lost loved ones because diagnostic tools weren't available or affordable when they needed them. She thought about building something that actually mattered, that would outlast her and make the world genuinely better. Set up the meeting, Rachel said. Let's make this happen. That evening, she shared the news with Jack and Sophie over dinner at her apartment. A small space she'd furnished simply but comfortably, though she spent more nights at Jack's place than her own these days. "So you're going to help sick people all over the world?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide. "That's like being a superhero, but with science instead of superpowers." "I guess it is," Rachel agreed. "Though it's a team effort, I can't do it alone. But yes, if this partnership works out, we'll be able to help a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise have access to early cancer detection." "Your mom would be proud," Jack said quietly, reaching across the table to squeeze Rachel's hand. This is exactly the kind of work she wanted Morgan Technologies to do. "I know," Rachel said. "I think about her a lot these days, about how she built that company with such clear purpose, and how somewhere along the way that purpose got lost beneath growth strategies and market dominance. I'm trying to build something that won't lose its purpose, no matter how big it gets." "That's why you'll succeed," Jack said, "because you remember what matters." 6 months after the airport incident that had brought them together, Rachel stood in front of a mirror adjusting her outfit for what felt like the 100th time. It wasn't a business suit this time. Those lived in her closet now, pulled out rarely for formal occasions. Instead, she wore jeans and a soft sweater, casual and comfortable, perfect for what she had planned. "You look beautiful," Jack said from the doorway of her bedroom, making her jump. "I didn't hear you come in," Rachel said. "Where's Sophie?" "At Aunt Marie's for a sleepover, which means we have the whole evening to ourselves." He stepped into the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You're nervous." "Why? We've been together for 6 months. We've had hundreds of dinners together." "This one feels different," Rachel admitted. "I have something I want to talk to you about, and I'm not sure how you'll react." Jack turned her to face him, his expression curious but not concerned. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. That's what we do now." They went to a small Italian restaurant that had become their favorite. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet corners where they could talk without being overheard. After they'd ordered and were waiting for their meals, Rachel took a deep breath and pulled out a folder she'd been carrying. "I've been thinking about the future," she started, "about what I want and what kind of life I'm building, and I realized I need to make some changes." Jack's expression shifted slightly, worry creeping in at the edges. "What kind of changes?" "I'm selling my apartment," Rachel said. "It doesn't make sense to keep paying for a place I barely live in when I spend most of my time at yours. And I've been thinking that maybe it's time to find a place together. Something bigger than your current apartment, with enough space for all of us to have our own areas but still feel like home." She saw relief wash over Jack's face. "You want to move in together officially?" "I want more than that," Rachel said, opening the folder. "I've been looking at houses. Not mansions or anything ridiculous, just regular family homes in good school districts. Places with yards where Sophie could have that puppy she keeps mentioning. Places where we could build a life together without feeling cramped." Jack looked through the printouts she'd brought. Modest single-family homes in neighborhoods near both his hospital and her warehouse. Nothing extravagant, but nice. Comfortable. The kind of places where families grew roots and built memories. "Rachel, these are all... I can't afford houses like these," Jack said quietly. "Not on a nurse's salary, even with overtime." "I know," Rachel said, "but I can. And before you get all proud and masculine about it, hear me out. I walked away from Morgan Technologies with enough money that I'll never have to worry about finances again. That money is just sitting there, earning interest, while we're living separately, and you're working double shifts to make ends meet. It doesn't make sense. We're building a life together. Why not use the resources we have to make that life comfortable?" "Because I don't want to be the guy who moves in with a wealthy woman and stops pulling his weight," Jack said, his jaw tight. "I have pride, Rachel. I need to contribute." "You are contributing," Rachel said firmly. "You're raising an incredible daughter. You're working a job that saves lives and exhausts you. You're building a home and a family and providing emotional support that I desperately needed when we met. That's not nothing, Jack. That's everything. I'm not asking you to be financially dependent on me. I'm asking you to let me use money that means nothing to me on something that means everything. Building a home with the people I love." Jack was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with pride and practicality. "What about Sophie? How would we explain this to her?" "We tell her the truth, that I have money from my old job, and I want to use it to help our family have a nicer place to live." Kids understand that different families have different financial situations. What matters is that she feels secure and loved, not who paid for which piece of furniture. Their food arrived, giving Jack time to think. Rachel waited, letting him process. She understood his resistance. Pride was important, especially for a man who'd built his entire life on self-sufficiency. But she also believed what she'd told him, that his contributions to their relationship went far beyond financial. "Okay," Jack said finally, "but with conditions. I pay for all the utilities and groceries. I maintain the yard and handle repairs. And when we get married, because we are getting married, just so we're clear, we draw up a prenup that protects your assets and makes it clear I'm not after your money." "When we get married?" Rachel repeated, smiling despite the serious conversation. "Is that your way of proposing?" "No," Jack said. "When I propose, you'll know it. It'll be romantic and thoughtful, and I'll have a ring. This is just me acknowledging reality. I'm going to marry you, Rachel Morgan, probably sooner rather than later, because I'm too old to date for years and Sophie keeps asking when she gets to be the flower girl at our wedding. But I need to do this on my terms, in my time, in a way that feels right." "I can wait," Rachel said softly. "I've got all the time in the world." They looked at houses that weekend, Rachel, Jack, and Sophie piling into Jack's car to tour properties in family-friendly neighborhoods. Sophie provided running commentary on each place, rating them based on important criteria like, does it have a good tree for climbing, and is there space for a telescope on the roof? The fourth house they visited was perfect. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, a backyard with mature trees, and a finished basement that could be converted into a home office for Rachel. The kitchen was spacious enough for Sophie to help make pancakes without everyone being cramped. The master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom and French doors leading to a small balcony. And the third bedroom was perfect for Sophie, large enough for her growing collection of books and her inevitable expansion of stuffed animals. "This one," Sophie announced, running through the empty rooms and imagining furniture placement. "This is the one. I can feel it. Can't you feel it?" Rachel looked at Jack, who was standing in the living room with his hands in his pockets, studying the space with an expression that suggested he was imagining their life here. Morning coffee by that window, Christmas trees in that corner, Sophie doing homework at the dining table while they cooked dinner together. "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "I can feel it too." They made an offer that day. With Rachel's financial backing, they were able to pay cash and the house was theirs within 3 weeks. Moving in was a production involving Jack's sister, Sophie's excitement reaching fever pitch, and Rachel's newfound appreciation for how much stuff an 8-year-old could accumulate. The first night in their new home, they ordered pizza because nobody had energy to cook. They ate sitting on the floor of the empty living room while Sophie narrated her plans for decorating her room, and Jack made notes about furniture they'd need to buy. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. After Sophie was asleep in her new room, still mostly empty except for her bed and Mr. Hopscotch, Rachel and Jack stood on the back porch looking at their yard in the moonlight. "Are you happy?" Jack asked, pulling her close against the evening chill. "Happier than I've ever been," Rachel said honestly. 6 months ago, I was miserable and didn't even know it. I thought success was supposed to look like corner offices and board meetings and building empires. And then I met you and Sophie, and you showed me that success can look like this: a house full of love and laughter, meaningful work that helps people, and coming home every night to people who actually care about who I am rather than what I can do for them. You gave us a lot too, Jack said. You gave Sophie a mother figure who challenges her intellectually and shows her what strong women can accomplish. You gave me a partner who understands that love isn't about grand gestures, but about showing up consistently. And you gave both of us a sense of family that extends beyond just the two of us. Morgan Life Sciences officially launched 2 months later with a press event that drew international attention. The cancer detection software was now in final testing phases before FDA approval, and the partnership with the World Health Organization meant global distribution was already being planned. Rachel stood at a podium in front of journalists and investors, but instead of feeling the old pressure to perform, she felt genuine pride in what her team had accomplished. Laura was now Chief Operating Officer of Morgan Life Sciences, having left Morgan Technologies to join Rachel's new venture. Several other talented people had followed, drawn by the mission-driven focus and the chance to work on projects that prioritized impact over profit. During the Q&A session, a journalist asked the question Rachel had been expecting. Do you regret leaving Morgan Technologies? Walking away from a billion-dollar empire to start over must have been difficult. Rachel thought about how to answer honestly. I don't regret leaving because I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something. I was walking toward work that feels meaningful, toward relationships that feel real, toward a life that aligns with my values. Morgan Technologies is thriving under new leadership, and I'm proud of what we built there. But I'm even more proud of what we're building here. Technology that will save lives regardless of whether it's profitable, a company culture that values people over quarterly earnings, and a mission that matters more than market dominance. She paused, then added, sometimes the biggest success is recognizing when something isn't serving you anymore and having the courage to make a change. I thought success meant building the biggest company, making the most money, having the most impressive title, but real success is building a life you don't need to escape from. And that's what I have now. The journalist pressed further. There are rumors about your personal life, that you're engaged to a nurse and helping raise his daughter. Some people say you've settled for less than you could have had. How do you respond to that? Rachel smiled, thinking about Jack and Sophie at home waiting for her. I'd say those people have a very limited understanding of what more means. Yes, I'm with someone who's a nurse rather than a fellow CEO. Yes, I'm helping raise a child who isn't biologically mine. And I've never been richer in the ways that actually matter, rich in love, rich in purpose, rich in relationships that sustain and fulfill me. Anyone who thinks that's settling doesn't understand what they're looking at. The clip went viral, shared across social media with comments ranging from supportive to skeptical. But Rachel didn't care about public opinion anymore. She'd spent too many years carefully managing her image, and she was done with that exhausting performance. 8 months after they'd met, on a Saturday morning that started like any other, Jack woke Rachel early and told her to get dressed for a hike. Sophie was already up and practically vibrating with excitement, which should have been Rachel's first clue that something was happening. They drove to the state park where they'd had their first family outing, and Jack led them to Sophie's Thinking Rock overlooking the valley. The autumn colors were spectacular, trees painted in shades of gold and crimson, the air crisp and clean. Why are we here? Rachel asked, though Sophie's barely contained grin was making her suspicious. Jack took both her hands in his, and Rachel's heart started beating faster. Rachel Morgan, I met you on the worst day of your life and somehow convinced you to trust a stranger with your safety. You've spent the last 8 months becoming part of our family, showing my daughter what strong, principled women look like, and reminding me that it's possible to find love when you're not looking for it. You've changed our lives in ways I can't fully express, and I can't imagine a future without you in it. He knelt down, pulling a ring box from his pocket, and Rachel felt tears start streaming down her face. Will you marry me? Will you officially become Sophie's mom and my wife and make this family complete? Say yes, Sophie shouted from where she'd been standing nearby, unable to contain herself any longer. Say yes, Rachel. I helped pick out the ring. Rachel laughed through her tears, looking at the ring, a simple but beautiful diamond that reflected the morning light. Yes, she said, pulling Jack to his feet and kissing him while Sophie cheered. Yes to all of it. Yes to being your wife and Sophie's mom and building this life together. Sophie threw herself at both of them, and they stood there on the rock overlooking the valley. 3 people who'd found each other through crisis and chaos and built something beautiful from the wreckage of what came before. The wedding happened 3 months later, a small ceremony in their backyard with close friends and family. Sophie was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself and carrying her beloved Mr. Hopscotch down the aisle because he's family too and he should be here. Laura was Rachel's maid of honor, standing beside her while she married the man who'd saved her from more than just an abusive partner, who'd saved her from a life that looked successful but felt empty. Jack's sister Marie cried through the entire ceremony, as did Margaret Chen and several other board members from Morgan Technologies who'd supported Rachel through her crisis. David Kim gave a toast at the reception about courage and second chances and knowing when to walk away from something that no longer served you. But the moment Rachel remembered most clearly came during their first dance, when Sophie cut in halfway through the song and insisted on dancing with both of them. Are you happy? Sophie asked, looking up at Rachel with those solemn brown eyes. Because Daddy says the most important thing is that you're happy. I'm so happy, Rachel assured her, happier than I ever thought possible. Good, Sophie said with satisfaction. Because you're stuck with us now. We're a family forever. Forever sounds perfect, Rachel said, meeting Jack's eyes over Sophie's head and seeing her entire future reflected there. Morning pancakes and piano recitals, science fair projects, and telescope lessons. The beautiful ordinary chaos of a life built on love rather than ambition. Morgan Life Sciences continued to grow, but Rachel maintained strict boundaries between work and family. She left the office at 5 every day, attended Sophie's school events, and never missed family dinners. The cancer detection software received FDA approval and began saving lives globally, exactly as she'd envisioned. Other medical technology companies started following their model, focusing on impact alongside profit, measuring success by lives saved rather than just dollars earned. 2 years after the wedding, Rachel stood in a hospital room holding a newborn daughter while Jack looked on with tears streaming down his face, and 10-year-old Sophie peered into her baby sister's face with wonder. She's so small, Sophie whispered. Is she going to be okay? She's going to be perfect, Rachel assured her, thinking about how far she'd come from that desperate night in Newark Airport. Just like you're perfect. Just like our whole crazy beautiful family is perfect. Sophie reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around her sister's. I'm going to teach her everything, Sophie announced. How to look at stars through the telescope, how to play piano, how to be brave when things are scary. And I'm going to tell her about how you and Daddy met, and how sometimes the best things happen when everything seems terrible. Rachel looked at Jack, who was watching his daughters with an expression of such profound love that it made her chest ache. This was what success looked like. Not corner offices or billion-dollar valuations, but this. A family built from broken pieces and brave choices. Work that mattered more than money. Love that demanded nothing except presence and honesty. She thought about Rachel Morgan, the CEO, the woman who'd boarded a plane in San Francisco just a few years ago, convinced that achievement was the only metric that mattered. That woman would never have believed this was possible, that walking away from everything could lead to everything that actually mattered. But standing in this hospital room with her husband and daughters, with meaningful work waiting for her at a company that saved lives, with a home full of laughter and love and Sophie's astronomical facts, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the expected choice, but the right one. Sometimes being rescued wasn't about being saved from danger. Sometimes it was about being reminded of who you were before the world told you who you had to be. And sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in building empires or conquering markets, but in choosing love over achievement, presence over perfection, and peace over power. Rachel had chosen all of those things, and in return, she'd gained everything that mattered. Her shoulder, the one Andrew had grabbed so cruelly that night in Newark, no longer hurt. The physical injury had healed, but more importantly, so had the deeper wounds. She'd learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, that starting over wasn't failure, and that the right people would love you for who you were rather than what you could provide. As Sophie began explaining to her baby sister about the constellation Orion, clearly not caring that the infant couldn't understand a word, and Jack wrapped his arms around Rachel from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple, Rachel closed her eyes and felt something she'd been chasing her entire life finally settle into place. Contentment. Belonging. Home. Not in a building or a city or a title, but in the arms of people who loved her unconditionally. In work that made the world better. In a life built on authenticity rather than ambition. She'd found her empire after all. It just looked nothing like what she'd expected, and it was infinitely more valuable than anything she'd left behind.